I never thought a gaming lobby could change my life, but that's exactly where it started, and where I almost lost everything. My name is Addy. I'm 26 years old. I work from home, and I spend most of my evenings playing an open-world survival game. It's the kind of game where the world is brutal and unforgiving, and surviving alone is nearly impossible. You need allies. You need someone watching your back. About 6 weeks ago, I found mine, or so I thought. His username was Echo. He appeared in my server one evening, offering to help me clear a particularly brutal area I've been stuck on for days. He knew exactly what he was doing. Patient, tactical, funny in the dry, understated way I appreciate. Within a week, we were logging on together every night. He remembered details I mentioned offhand, that I preferred stealth builds, that I hated the swamp biome, that I always named my in-game horses after jazz musicians. It felt like genuine friendship, the kind that doesn't come along often. We eventually migrated to Discord, which felt like a natural step. Voice calls, then video calls. He never showed his face, always claiming his camera was broken, but his voice was warm and easy to listen to. I didn't question it. I trusted him. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony as the sun went down, painting everything amber and rose. It was genuinely beautiful, the kind of sunset that feels unfair to keep to yourself. I snapped a photo and sent it to Echo without thinking. Just a pretty view, I told him. He said it looked peaceful. I forgot about it almost immediately. 2 days later, I got a message from him. No greeting, no preamble. The pizza place on the corner of 4th and Main is having a sale. You should go. I read it twice, then a third time. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical, like the floor had tilted beneath my feet. I had never told Echo what city I lived in. I had never mentioned my street, my neighborhood, or anything about my surroundings. But that photo, the one I'd sent without a second thought, still had its metadata intact. GPS coordinates embedded invisibly in the image file, broadcasting my exact location to anyone who knew how to look. He had known where I lived for 2 days and said nothing. I blocked him on every platform, deleted my Discord account, and sat in my bathroom with the lights off for 20 minutes trying to slow my heartbeat. I told myself it was over. I told myself I had caught it in time. I was wrong. That night, around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a notification from a food delivery app I hadn't opened in weeks. Your order is outside. I hadn't placed an order. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. A delivery driver stood on my porch, a large bag in his hands, completely unsuspecting, but behind him, idling at the curb with its headlights off, was a dark SUV, just sitting there, waiting. I didn't open the door. I watched the driver set the bag down and leave. The SUV didn't move. Then my phone buzzed again. An unknown number this time. You forgot to say thank you, Addy. I even got the extra dipping sauce you like. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called 911 and was talking to the dispatcher when the SUV's door finally swung open. A man stepped out onto the pavement. He wasn't rushing. He moved with the calm, deliberate patience of someone who had planned this carefully and was entirely unbothered by what he was doing. He was carrying a heavy roll of industrial plastic sheeting in one hand and a gym bag in the other. He didn't come to the front door. He turned and walked along the side of the house, directly toward the window of my home office. I ran. I made it to that room just as he reached the window. He looked straight at me through the glass, and he didn't flinch. He didn't run. He held up his phone so I could see the screen clearly. A real-time location tracker. A small blue dot pulsing steadily. Weeks earlier, he had sent me what he described as a gift, a custom game file he'd made for me. I had opened it without hesitation. Somewhere buried inside it was a tracking script that had been reporting my location ever since. He knew where I was in my house. He had probably known for days. I heard sirens before he got the window screen fully removed. He was still working on the window frame when 2 patrol cars came around the corner. He was arrested on my side lawn, gym bag at his feet. The police told me afterward what they found inside that bag: zip ties, a syringe loaded with a sedative, and a printed document. Every message we had ever exchanged, going back to the very first night in the gaming lobby, with my full home address handwritten at the top and highlighted in yellow. He had driven across 3 states to get to me. He had spent weeks building my trust, learning my habits, mapping my routines. The friendship wasn't real. It was architecture. Every joke, every in-game assist, every late-night conversation was a brick in a structure designed for one purpose. I still play sometimes. I still love the game. But I strip the metadata from every photo I take. I never open unsolicited files, and I keep my location services off by default. I don't tell people my name anymore either. Not the real one. I'm a 20-year-old female, but at the time I was 18. I had been working at this well-known bakery for about 3 years and never experienced anything like this. I had heard scary stories from people who worked at different locations, but I never expected anything would happen at my store. At the time, I was normally working the early morning shift, but this day I swapped shifts with someone who closed. I closed a lot while in high school, so this was nothing new for me. I was working with 2 other people, Sarah, who was my age, and Karen, who was around 50. It was a pretty slow night, and we decided to start our closing tasks early so we didn't have to stay longer than necessary. Back then, we closed at midnight on the weekends, but corporate changed to 10 p.m. not long after this night. We finished most of our tasks by 11:15 p.m., but had to wait until we were fully closed to finish the last 2. Sarah, Karen, and I were chatting about a new restaurant that we all wanted to try when I noticed this older man outside her store. Something about him immediately felt off. He had a big backpack on, a long scraggly beard, and messy hair. He was dirty, and his clothes were stained and full of rips. He was farther away from the store, but I could tell he was watching us. The front of the bakery was all windows, so he could clearly see everything inside. He soon walked away, and I didn't think much of it. We continued chatting. About 5 minutes later, we heard the door open. I saw the man walk inside her store holding his backpack and a giant bag of popcorn. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked like one of those oversized carnival bags. It was out of place enough that it immediately caught my attention. There weren't any stores nearby that sold anything like that, and I was pretty sure he didn't have it when I saw him outside earlier. The 3 of us looked at each other, silently trying to decide who would help him. I finally stepped up to the register and asked what I could get him. He said he wanted a cookie but didn't have any money. I felt bad for him, especially with the condition he was in. I personally think everyone deserves a small treat, whether they have money or not. Since we had extras that would most likely be thrown out, I gave him 2 for free. He seemed very grateful and then offered me some of his popcorn. At first I thought it was just a kind gesture, trying to return the favor. I smiled and said, "That's very sweet of you, but no thank you." He seemed almost surprised that I declined, and kept insisting, "Oh, just have some popcorn." I kept declining as nicely as I could, trying not to make him more upset. He kept asking if I was sure in a way that felt more pushy than friendly. Eventually he left, and once the doors closed, all 3 of us agreed the interaction felt off. Not long after, Karen finished her shift and started packing up. Before she left, she told us to lock the door, leave the trash, which was a nightly task for morning crew, and walk out to our cars together. "Something just feels off," she said. We all agreed. I locked the door after she left, and thankfully, we didn't have any more customers the rest of the night, so I didn't have to open the door again and possibly let the man back in. I went into the back to finish a couple of dishes while Sarah mopped up front. A few minutes later, Sarah came into the back looking very panicked. I took out my earbuds, and that's when I heard it. Loud banging and yelling. She said the man was back and trying to get inside. He was very angry, shouting that he had left his backpack in the store and we had taken it. I knew for a fact we hadn't. I peeked my head around the corner and we locked eyes through the glass. That seemed to make him even more upset. The yelling and banging became louder, and he was violently yanking and slamming the door, shaking the glass, like he was trying to rip it open. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but right before I hit call, everything went quiet, absolutely silent. No shouting, no banging, nothing. Sarah and I froze. We listened carefully. Then we heard the door start to unlock, then open and close. I remember panicking and thinking, did he break the lockbox outside and get the key? We didn't know what to do. Running and hiding seemed like the obvious choice, but fear had our feet glued to the ground. Then we heard Karen yelling at the front of the store, asking if we were okay. We came out from the back and saw Karen, but no man. I felt immediate relief. She told us she had driven 10 minutes out, but had a gut feeling to turn around. When she came back, she saw the man at the door, got out of her car, and told him to leave or she would call the police. He ran immediately. We never called the police and never saw him again. I'm so grateful Karen came back. With how violently he was trying to open the door, I'm sure he wasn't too far from getting in. What freaked me out the most is his backpack was never in the store. In fact, I'm pretty sure I saw it outside when I peeked my head around the corner earlier. I don't know if he was confused, on something, or had worse intentions, but I'm grateful Sarah and I didn't have to find that out. After that, our manager always made sure to have a male employee on closing shifts. I'm almost 21 now, and just quit from that bakery, and thankfully nothing like that has happened again. Just one scary incident in the 5 years I worked there. I'll never ignore gut feelings, mine or someone else's. They're almost never wrong. My name's JD, and this is something that stuck with me since I was 13. I grew up in a quiet town in Trinidad. It wasn't the kind of place where anything serious really happened. Most nights were calm, and people mostly kept to themselves. Looking back, that's probably why this felt so out of place. I wasn't a popular kid. I kept to myself, didn't have many friends, and spent most of my time at home. That's just how things were for me. The first time something strange happened was on a school night in May. I had just come home from school, and I was sitting in the living room with my dad watching TV. My mom was asleep in the bedroom, and my siblings weren't home yet. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud thud on the roof. It didn't sound like something small. It sounded heavy, like something had landed up there. My dad and I both looked up at the same time. Then, almost immediately after, the cross we had hanging on the wall fell to the ground, and the power went out. The entire house went dark in seconds. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then my dad quietly muttered, "What the hell?" I remember feeling uneasy right away. It wasn't just the blackout. We'd had those before. But the timing didn't make sense. The thud, the cross falling, and the power cutting out all happened within seconds of each other. My dad told me not to worry and said it was probably just a power outage, but he didn't sound convinced. By the time my siblings got home, it was already getting dark. My parents realized we didn't have enough candles, so my 2 older sisters and I went to a nearby shop to buy some. The shop wasn't far, but when we got there, my sisters ran into friends and started talking. I kept telling them we should go, but they brushed me off. What should have taken 15 minutes turned into almost 2 hours. By the time we started walking back, it was dark, around 7. Most of the street lights weren't working because of the outage, and the road felt a lot quieter than usual. On the way home, I told my sisters I needed to pee, so I stepped off near some bushes. At first, everything felt normal. Then I got that feeling, that sudden, heavy awareness that someone or something was watching me. I stopped and stared into the bushes. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like something was standing just out of sight, completely still, just watching. My sisters called my name from the road. JD, hurry up. Mom and Dad are waiting. That snapped me out of it. I rushed back to them and didn't say anything. I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. When we got home, we lit the candles and settled in. Eventually, everyone went to bed. Everyone except me. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that feeling in the bushes. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured something standing there in the dark. At some point, one of my sisters woke up. The candle in her room had burned out, and everything was pitch black again. She started calling for my mom. Mommy? No response. She said it again, louder. Mommy? Then, from outside the window, something answered. Mommy. I sat up instantly. My sister froze. The voice didn't sound right. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something trying to copy the word, but not understanding how it should actually sound. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then it said it again. Mommy. Same voice, same tone. My chest felt tight, and the air in the room felt heavy. I looked at my sister, and she was already staring at me. That was when I knew I hadn't imagined it. Before anything else could happen, my older brother woke up and got annoyed that we were making noise. We told him something was outside, but he just told us to stop and go to sleep. He didn't hear it, but we did. The next morning, everything went back to normal. The power was back, the cross was hung up again, and no one talked about it. But I never forgot that voice. 5 years passed. By the time I was 18, life had changed a lot. My mom had passed away. I had just gone through a breakup, and I spent most of my time alone at home. One night, I came back after hanging out with one of the few friends I had left. The house felt empty. I ate, took a shower, and went to my room. As I started making my bed, I felt it again. That same feeling, like something was watching me. I froze. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just stressed, that it was all in my head. Then I turned around. There was something outside my window. It was close to the glass, just enough for me to see its face clearly. Its skin was pale, almost gray. It had no hair. Its eyes were wide and white, like there were no pupils. And it was smiling, the kind of smile that didn't look human, too wide, too forced. I couldn't move. It knew I saw it. The smile stretched even wider. Then it spoke. Mommy. The same voice, exactly the same as the night when I was 13. That's when I lost it. I screamed, then ran out of the house without thinking. I didn't even stop to grab anything. I just ran straight to a neighbor's house, shaking. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. They thought I imagined it or had some kind of panic attack. They let me stay the night, but I didn't sleep. The next day, I told my dad, but he didn't believe me either. But when I told my sister, the same one who heard the voice with me years ago, her reaction was different. She looked at me and said, "You saw it too?" That made my stomach drop. Then she told me something she had never mentioned before. About a month earlier, she had been home with her boyfriend. He was asleep, and she went to the bathroom. While she was in there, she heard a tapping on the window. She looked over, and there was something standing outside. Same pale face, same blank eyes, same smile. And then it said one word. Mommy. She screamed and her boyfriend woke up, but by the time he checked, it was gone. That was when it really hit me. This thing wasn't just something I imagined as a kid. It had been there. It had come back. Or maybe it never left. I don't know what landed on our roof that night. I don't know why the cross fell, or why the power went out at that exact moment. And I definitely don't know what that thing is. But I know what I saw. And I know my sister saw it too. Even now, I hate looking out windows at night, especially when the room is dark and the glass turns into a reflection, because sometimes, when I catch my reflection just right, it almost feels like I'm not the only one looking back. My name's Donovan, and this is something that stuck with me for most of my life. I grew up in Denver, in a part of the city that wasn't exactly safe. I was around 7 or 8 at the time, the oldest of 5 kids, and we lived in a small apartment complex where something was always happening. Fights, screaming, police showing up almost every night. It was just normal to us. My dad worked long shifts, usually from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., so most nights it was just my mom trying to keep everything together. She always told us things were fine, that we were safe. But even at that age, I knew she didn't fully believe that. There was one night that felt different. I remember it clearly because of how quiet it was. No yelling, no sirens, nothing. Even my mom noticed it. We were just sitting there watching TV, almost enjoying the silence for once. Then, out of nowhere, a scream cut through the complex. It was so loud and sudden. It felt like it came from right outside our window. The kind of scream you don't forget. My siblings immediately started crying. I just froze. My mom rushed to the window, trying to see what was going on, but she couldn't see anything from our angle. Within seconds, more noise followed. People yelling, shouting for help. Someone screaming to call 911. It all seemed to be coming from the far side of the building. Within minutes, police, ambulances, and fire trucks flooded the area. My mom told us to stay inside and lock the door while she went to check what happened. I stayed with my siblings, trying to calm them down, but I couldn't shake that scream out of my head. When my mom came back, she looked completely shaken, pale, quiet, like she'd just seen something she didn't want to process. I kept asking her what happened, but she wouldn't tell me. She just said it wasn't something I needed to hear, then called my dad and told him to come home immediately. When he got back, he had the same look on his face. Later, I overheard him telling my mom what he saw. A man had been pushed out of a top floor window. There was broken glass everywhere, and his body was lying below, covered with a sheet. That scream we heard was him. For a long time after that, I couldn't get it out of my head. A few days later, we walked past the area where it happened. There was still dried blood on the ground. I remember looking up and seeing the boarded up window above. It didn't feel real, but at the same time, it felt way too real. Things settled down for a while after that. At least, that's what we thought. A few months later, there was another night that felt off in the same way. Too quiet. We were inside again, watching TV. My dad was at work, and my mom kept saying she had a bad feeling. I didn't say anything, but I felt it too. Then we heard voices right outside our apartment door. At first, it sounded like an argument. A couple of guys going back and forth, getting louder, more aggressive. Some of the neighbors even shouted at them to take it somewhere else, but they didn't. Within seconds, it turned physical. You could hear shoving, hitting, things being knocked around. I made the mistake of stepping closer to the door to listen. My mom immediately told me to get back. And right after she said that, one of the guys started screaming. Not yelling, screaming. It was raw panic, pain, the kind of sound that hits you instantly. I ran straight back to my mom crying, and my siblings followed. The screaming didn't stop. We could hear him stumbling down the hallway, banging on doors, begging for help. At one point, he even hit our door. My mom shouted through it that the police were coming. By the time emergency services arrived, everything went quiet again. A few days later, a detective came by and spoke to my mom. He told her it was a drug deal that went bad. 2 men had been stabbed. One survived, the other didn't make it. That was the moment my mom decided we were leaving. We moved to another part of the complex first, then eventually to a completely different neighborhood a couple years later. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Years later, when I was in my early 30s, I got a job at a warehouse doing early morning and overnight shifts. One day during a break, I stepped outside and started looking around, and something felt familiar. The layout, the buildings, the train tracks nearby. Then I saw it. The same apartment complex. I hadn't realized I was working that close to it. It felt like my body just locked up. All those memories came back at once. The scream, the stabbing, everything. I remember just standing there, staring at it, thinking there's no way. I tried to shake it off, but ever since that day, something felt off about working there, especially at night. Eventually, I started taking overnight shifts because the extra pay was too good to pass up. The problem was, the backside of the building was almost completely dark. No proper lighting, just empty space leading to old train tracks where people would hang around at night. Every time I was out there, I had this constant feeling that someone was watching me. Then one night, it finally happened. It was sometime around late spring, maybe May or June of 2022. I was outside loading delivery trucks. Everything was normal at first. I got to the third truck and started filling it with gas. That usually takes a few minutes, so I was just standing there, looking up at the sky, trying to relax. That's when I heard it. 2 loud pops. I didn't even need to think about it. I knew what it was. Gunshots. My heart instantly started racing. I dropped down, trying to figure out where it came from, but I couldn't see anything. It was just darkness. I had to make a decision fast. Stay where I was, or run. The problem was, I was standing right next to a truck with an open gas tank. If a stray bullet hit it, that could have been it. The nearest door back into the building was maybe 40 feet away. It didn't feel far, but in that moment, it felt like a mile. I shut off the gas as fast as I could and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran straight for the door, thinking about my fiance and my daughter, hoping I'd make it inside. I got in, slammed the door behind me, and just stood there trying to breathe. I waited, expecting someone to come through that door. No one did. I told my manager what happened and we called the police. They showed up, searched the area, but didn't find anything. I thought maybe that was the end of it. The next day, my manager told me the police came back and found 2 bullet casings right near the front entrance, about 50 feet from where I'd been standing. That's what still bothers me. Those shots weren't random. They were close enough that whoever fired them knew someone was there. To this day, I still think about it. I don't know if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if someone had been watching me. Either way, I left that job not long after, and as far as I'm concerned, that entire area is just wrong. Some places don't change, and some things don't stay in the past.
This happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job, but I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it was also putting me in the best shape of my life. It was also about this time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive to me, as well as an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation in the first place. I had just gotten off of work and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she had been in her boyfriend's house and they had a fight. She walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large light green car, like a Caddy or a Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they threatened her and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out, so I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car, that I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight, there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed that she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car and she started asking me about money. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car, now she's going to rob me. Dang. But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette, affectionately nicknamed Shitbox, and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are, there they are." She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked the rear view and sure enough, the light green car is right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are going to mess you up, bitch. You're done." She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, and telling me all the messed up shit these guys are planning to do. Now, if I'd been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I'd been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really angry. I realized 3 things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. The crazy psycho next to me hadn't put on her seatbelt yet either. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they hadn't caught up. This crazy woman started yelling. I slammed on the brakes, and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some pretty crazy stuff. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "Get the heck out of here. Get out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped open the door. And I started shoving and punching her until she tumbled out of the door to the curb. Stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door. Then I cut across town and got into the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down and get my stuff together, and I drove home. I told my sister, I was living with her temporarily after the breakup with my ex, everything that happened. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. Hey guys, this is a real story that has absolutely traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents as the situation at home was beginning to become too toxic for me. In my first year at university, I moved into student accommodation and met some really great people. it was a good year, without meeting my boyfriend who I'm still with, and just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, as the second year came by, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations, but at least we had our own house and weren't restricted as much with noise and parties as living in a small shared flat like in the first year. Note, I had a ground floor room and my window gave into a very small backyard in which I would go smoke every day as I am a smoker, and in which there would be a very thin wooden door giving into the other side of the street where you would put your bins and broken chairs. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard, but since it was an old door, we had to attach some things to keep it closed for good. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and some other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right of us were 5 boys who looked way over the age of being in university. They were strange, so to say. I met one of them outside of our house one day because of a police intervention, due to one of his flatmates attacking him and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams, and so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them being covered in blood and cuts everywhere on his arm, and a wound on his head inflicted by a kitchen knife. I and my flatmates didn't know what to do, so we offered him help to clean himself up and gave him an old t-shirt to change out his bloody clothes. We then saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and into a van and driven off to be arrested. I don't know anything more about the story. The police didn't really tell us anything. Anyway, the guy who we helped was quite weird. He said a lot of BS and kept trying to grab me and flirt with me, and we noticed when helping him he smoked quite a lot of weed, but we just didn't really care at the moment as we wanted to make sure he was alright as we didn't know him. Then after some time had passed, I would go to uni and come back home and see him quite often in the street, and just never say a word to him again. But one day he came up to me in the street while I was going to the corner shop and started talking to me weirdly, and I didn't feel comfortable at all with it for some reason, so I just didn't respond. He then said, that's okay. I'll just wait in front of your house then and we can talk further. No need to say, I was insanely creeped out and just thought he was joking, so I bought my drink at the shop and headed back to my street. And as I turned into the street where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep and waiting for me. So I panicked and went back to the corner shop and called my only guy flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away. But obviously he wasn't home as no one else was either. So I literally just waited it out until they left 1 hour later and then sprinted back home and locked the front door. Note, my front door had a glass panel on it where you would be able to kind of make out who was standing in front of it. As this was already pretty scary, I just tried to avoid the guy and mostly succeeded for a little while. But then one day, as I went smoking into the backyard, I noticed that the wooden floor, which is always closed, was open, and the strings that we put there to keep it closed were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think anything of it and just closed the door again and put a new string on it, thinking it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back. The weird neighbors would very often scream and yell and fight in their house, and it would wake me and my flatmates up in the middle of the night, but we kind of got used to it after a little while. But one evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually does, and he, who usually never wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up, and we both just waited in the dark and listened for any other noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door just bang, just shoot right open, and some footsteps next to my window. I always had my window open because it would get really warm in there, so we both just froze. Then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly as if they were trying to get inside, and then they stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed so they couldn't see us, but we were ready to get dressed and get the heck out of the room and lock them in if they came in from the window. Then we just heard my window move and get more open, and one of the guys said something in a different language that we didn't understand, and started to hear them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I just shot up out of the bed, took my phone, put clothes on, and ran out of the room and out of the house, so I then called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms, and then the police, who luckily came in less than 5 minutes, as the headquarters were a couple of streets down from us. I don't remember anything else after the police came. I think my boyfriend and I were in shock. They ended up catching one guy. The other fled and was later found a few streets up smoking weed. The police told us they went inside of their house and found a lot of meth and heroin, and that they were actually just carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused, as I've never done anything to offend or do anything wrong to my neighbors, so the idea of them breaking in with who knows what intentions with a kitchen knife terrorized me and my boyfriend. The 2 guys ended up being arrested, and one of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with the intention to harm. I never heard anything else from the police, and I moved back home a few months later as I was scared, and it tormented me for months on end, not knowing what would have happened if my boyfriend didn't wake up. I'm now still coping with it and finding it really tough to get over it. Always asking myself what if and what would have happened if. I now very often wake up because of the slightest noise and get horrible nightmares because of it. But hey, at least I'm still with my boyfriend and we often talk about it, and that helps a lot. During college, I dated a fairly well-known and talented local musician named Tim. As horrible boyfriends tend to do in the beginning, he was a loving, attentive, charismatic, seemingly normal partner. He made me mixtapes, cooked me my favorite meals, and dedicated songs to me at open mics around town. I, young, foolish, naive, was deeply smitten by his mysterious, dark, artistic allure. However, over the course of our year-long relationship, his mental health severely declined. He had the ability to appear lucid and normal around other people, but in private he began suffering delusions, compulsively lying, and creating art that focused on themes of rape and murder. I was worried sick, and his condition was exhausting, but I did my best to be kind, understanding, and supportive. I loved him and believed that he shouldn't have to struggle with his mental illness alone. One time he vanished without a trace for a full day. I found his apartment empty, lights on, front door wide open, phone on his nightstand. I took a few deep breaths and called all around the city for hours before finally discovering he had been involuntarily checked into a mental hospital. I did my best to be strong for him, seeing him every day during supervised visitation hour, bringing him his favorite books to pass the time, and holding him as he cried that it was all a mistake, that he did not belong there. It was surreal to see my gentle, intelligent, normal, albeit depressed boyfriend surrounded by visibly insane, long-term psychiatric ward patients. For real, the place was like something out of a horror movie. In retrospect, none of the staff ever told me the real reason why he was there, and I was too polite and naive to ask. Our relationship ended a few months later. I found undeniable evidence that he was cheating on me and, secretly relieved, confronted him. I told him to leave my apartment and never come back. He cracked. The gentle Tim I had known and loved melted away to reveal a new persona with dead, wild animal eyes. He threatened to kill someone unless I took him back, but I was so extremely done that I called the police. They weren't much help, but Tim left. I blocked him everywhere and never contacted him again, but he left me insane voicemails from different numbers for weeks afterwards. I was relatively unshaken and things returned to normalcy. I graduated and got a sweet job in the same cool college city. 6 months later, I woke up to concerned texts from my mutual friends saying that they didn't want to freak me out, but Tim was off his meds, clearly manic, and was posting a nearly written song all over social media. His best friend, who hadn't been in touch since before the breakup, sent me an apology along with a screenshot of the lyrics. That got my attention. I won't copy-paste them here because they'll lead back to his Bandcamp, but the song was pretty explicitly about my assault and murder, but in a sort of clever disguised way. It's catchy too, that bastard. I checked his profiles myself from a friend's account, and he was posting dozens and dozens of totally insane rambling statuses, most of them about me. They flip-flop between flowery love prose and murder imagery. His friends were reacting with concern, but a few egged him on, probably thinking he was just venting. I decided it'd be best to continue ignoring him, but I saved screenshots just in case. A few days later, while at work, I looked up from my computer to see Tim enter the far side of the studio. My blood turned to ice. He was talking to my creative director. It looked cordial enough, and I saw Tim begin to casually scan the studio. I ducked down and bolted into my favorite project manager's office, slammed the door, and unleashed upon her what must have been a nearly unintelligible explanation of what was happening. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak, but Nancy was amazing. She understood almost immediately. She snuck me out of the building and drove me in her car to the police station, where I showed officers the screenshots and filed a report. My coworkers later told me that Tim was there to inquire about the open designer position. But he is not a designer. He had brought with him a portfolio and an elaborately fabricated work history that sounded legit. At the end of his interview, he casually asked if I still worked there. He said we used to collaborate. Oh, and he had written a song for me, and it had been picked up by the local radio this morning. He asked my coworkers to let me know with warmest regards. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. He then left, found my abandoned car in the parking lot, and paced behind it until the police arrived. Unfortunately, he wasn't enough of a public menace for police to bring him in that day, but the incident helped me to secure a restraining order against him. My company was amazing too. I was deeply embarrassed about my literally insane ex coming to the studio, but the CEO filed trespassing charges against him and created an action plan to keep me safe if it happened again. Not long afterwards, I moved to a different city, and that was that. I haven't heard from him since, but I discovered the most alarming part after. His roommate at the time, Liz, went through a similar experience with him during his breakdown, and when we compared notes much later, she said she had seen a large axe in Tim's car the same week it had all calmed down. She said that she was worried about Tim's Facebook activity, so she removed the axe and hid it. Tim was so angry that he completely trashed their house and never came back. And if our timelines are correct, that must have been just before he came into my workplace for his interview. I had a stalker from Xbox Live try to find me at work 2 days ago on Monday. I'm only 17 and work second shift in my local movie theater. It was Friday night, my weekend had just begun. I was on Xbox Live and playing Overwatch, eating now cold pizza like lots of my friends were. I was kicking considerable ass, more than I usually was at this game, and I was on fire for non-Overwatch players. It basically means you're doing really good for 3 matches. At around 2 AM, I decided to step up my game and go into competitive mode. I got into a match at Kings Row, and I was playing fair on defense. I got a 15-player kill streak, but I noticed 5 of those kills were on the same guy, a Bastion. I remember his username. The match goes on for about another minute, and then I get an invite to a party. The gamer tag was the same as the Bastion I just killed for the 6th time. I wasn't in the party since all of my friends had called it a night except for me at that point. I decided that whatever he wanted to say could be interesting, so I added him. Now, I usually expect some kids a few years younger than me to be shit-talking me, but to my surprise, it was a grown man on the other end. More to my surprise, he sounded in his 30s rather than closer to my age, and he had a thick Spanish accent. Immediately, this guy starts cussing me out. I can't lie when I say I half expected this to happen when I got a party invite. Now I have the mentality where if you're a jerk to me, I'll return the favor, so I reply with the classic, "Oh, you mad, bro?" Guy doesn't acknowledge what I say at all, and instead of saying that he would screw my mom like most people do, they said, "Screw your entire family. I'll make sure to decapitate your mother and make your dad screw her down the throat." I was sort of shocked by this, but it didn't last. I told him to take a chill pill. "No, I want you to..." And he stopped. I noticed why. A diva on our team had just killed his Bastion hero again. Now, this is where things get scary. It sounded as if he turned into a rabid animal that was trying to suffocate itself on the mic and screaming and howling and spitting all at the same time. It's difficult to describe what exactly sound he was making, but that's the closest I can do. Inhumane noises were coming from this person as if he was being gutted and possessed by a demon at the same time. It was a grown man too, which made the entire thing scary compared to laughing my butt off when a 12-year-old loses it. The match ended. The enemy team that didn't get the payload moving at all. The man loses his stuff some more because he lost. Then I decide to be a jerk again and not take this clearly crazy guy's shit. Look, man, it's not my fault you suck at this game. You're just being treated like the child you really are, so just grow up. Guy didn't like this. He literally screamed at the top of his lungs, "F you," into the microphone for no joke like 20 seconds. It started getting all crackly. He was being so loud he was breaking his mic. He then removed me from the party. I decided that since the match was over, I decided to call it a night, just like my friends had. My overall reaction to what went down was, okay, that was something. I logged out and turned off my Xbox and went to bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I realized how much of a dummy I was for not recording any of it. My friends would have lost it when they heard it. Then I fell asleep. Saturday went by with nothing, and I thought that was that with the weird Spanish dude. Sunday was after Saturday, and I logged onto my Xbox that morning to play more Overwatch. I noticed I had a message from the guy saying, "Good morning," with my full name, and "I know you have to go to insert address of the movie theater I work at tomorrow." What the heck? I said aloud. I decided to pull out my phone and take a picture of the TV screen. I then texted my boss about it and told her that some guy on Xbox somehow found where I worked. Now, my boss is a weird old lady, so she naturally didn't care what happened. Even though it concerned my work, she just blew it off and told me I still had to come in the next day. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Incredibles 2 are both hot right now, so we were going to be busy. I ended up coming in the next day at 5:30. It was pretty boring and busy like I predicted. Up until about 8 o'clock when a super short guy came in through the door. It was loud and pretty crowded, but the guy hollers my name. The same thick Spanish accent from Xbox. It was him. I still to this day don't know where he got my info from or why he decided to come all the way to where I worked. The theater fell silent. I just walked to the back room where my boss was and told her that the guy from Xbox was inside. She repeated the whole, "I don't care what happens to you on the game. Get back to work. We're busy." I repeated to tell her that the guy was inside the building. I didn't know if he wanted to hurt me or not and that I was going to call the cops. I ended up actually calling the police. It wasn't until they arrived and spoke to me privately in the back room that my boss ended up taking me seriously. The Spanish guy was still inside the lobby and the cops put him in cuffs and walked him out. This is according to my boss. I was in the back room so I couldn't witness it. I still haven't heard anything from the police and I still don't know how he found my info or why he came all the way to where I worked. And I still don't know what he planned to do to me. Either way, I'm still a bit shaken up over it. I don't know if he knows my home address or not, and I'm pretty much on guard 24/7. Either way, I own 2 dogs that can scare off anyone, but I'm still terrified of this dude.
I moved into the house on a Tuesday. Nothing special about that. I had a few boxes, a mattress I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years, and a 6-month lease I'd signed without visiting the property in person. I was between jobs, and my cousin had found the listing and said the price was stupid cheap for the square footage. That should have told me something. The house was a 2-bedroom on a rural stretch outside Millhaven, Georgia. Old farmhouse style, maybe 80 years old. Sitting back off a gravel road with a tree line maybe 40 feet from the back porch. The nearest neighbor was a quarter mile up the road. I didn't mind that. I needed quiet more than I needed company at that point in my life. The first 2 weeks were fine. Better than fine, actually. I slept well. I got into a routine. I didn't think about much except putting myself back together. The first thing I noticed was the chair. I had a wooden chair I kept at the small desk in the second bedroom, which I was using as a home office. One morning I came into work and the chair had been moved back about 3 feet, facing the window instead of the desk. I live alone. I don't sleepwalk. I sat there for a second trying to remember if I had done it. Maybe moved it to look outside or something. I couldn't remember doing it, but I also couldn't rule it out. I turned it back around and got to work. I didn't think much of it at the time. The second thing happened about a week later. I was outside in the evening sometimes, just sitting on the back porch. It had become a habit, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, cooling down before bed. One night I noticed something at the edge of the tree line, a gap in the brush where someone or something had clearly been standing. The grass was flattened in a rough circle, not a large area, but deliberate looking, like someone had stood there for a while. Could have been a deer, could have been anything. The woods back there were full of whatever wildlife Georgia has in September. I told myself that, but it was the shape of it that bothered me a little. It wasn't a hoof print kind of shape. It was just a flat, wide, standing-shaped circle of pressed down grass. I started coming inside before dark after that. The third thing I can't explain away as easily. I was on a work call one afternoon sitting at my desk, and I pulled out my laptop camera to switch to video. In the thumbnail preview before I turned it on, I could see my face, the desk, the wall behind me, and the doorway to the hallway. The door was open maybe halfway, and standing just barely in the frame. Half hidden by the door was a shape, upright, still. I spun around in my chair immediately, and there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. I watched the video back later. The shape was there in the preview for about 2 seconds. It's blurry, and the lighting is bad, and I genuinely cannot tell you what I was looking at. I've shown it to 2 people and have gotten different reactions. One said it's a shadow from the curtains. The other didn't say anything for a long time, and then changed the subject. I started leaving every light on in the house after that. The fourth thing shook me in a way that's hard to describe. I was cleaning out the closet in the second bedroom, pulling stuff off the high shelf, and I found something pushed all the way in the back. A small glass jar with a handwritten label. Inside were about a dozen small strips of paper, folded tight. I opened it and read a few. They all had dates on them. Dates going back 11 years. Each one written in the same careful small handwriting. Just a date, nothing else. No name, no explanation. The most recent one was from 4 months ago. 4 months ago. The house had been empty for 8 months between tenants. I looked up the rental history afterward just to confirm. It had. I don't know who put those dates in that jar. I don't know what the dates mean. I threw it away and called the property management company, and they told me they'd pass it along to the owner. I never heard anything back. I started checking the locks twice every night after that. The fifth thing is why I left. About a month after I found the jar, I came home from a grocery run to find my back door unlocked. I was almost certain I had locked it, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I walked through the house, checked everything, didn't find anything wrong. I made dinner and tried to put it out of my mind. That night around 2 in the morning I woke up. I don't know why, I just did. I lay there for a few seconds listening. The house was quiet. Then I turned over and looked toward the bedroom door, which I always leave open a few inches, and I saw the light in the hallway was different. Dimmer, like something was standing between me and the hallway light. I didn't move for a long time. I just watched the gap in the door. After maybe 2 minutes, the light shifted back to normal. I heard a very soft sound from the front of the house, a creak, then the faint but distinct sound from the front door being pulled shut. Whoever it was had a key. They had let themselves in, and then they let themselves out, and for some reason, they'd come stand outside my bedroom door. I don't know how many times they'd done that before. I moved out 4 days later. I didn't finish the lease. I still think about the jar with the dates. 11 years of dates. And the house was supposedly vacant for most of them. Someone was coming and going that whole time. I don't know what they were tracking or why. I probably never will. That's the part I can't put down. I was 12 the summer my family rented a cabin near Lake Horrell. Not a resort or anything like that. Just a small cabin my dad found online somewhere in rural Minnesota. There was nothing around for miles except trees, a gravel road, and a gas station about 20 minutes away that doubled as a grocery store. My parents thought it would be good for me to get off screens for a while. I didn't argue much. I was a pretty agreeable kid back then. There was another family staying in the cabin next to ours. They had a daughter around my age named Kara. We got along fast the way kids do when there's nothing else around. By the second day, we were already wandering the tree line together, just looking for things to do. The first time something felt off was on our third morning there. We were sitting on the dock when a man walked along the far edge of the lake. He wasn't doing anything strange, just walking. But he stopped for a second and looked in our direction. Not the quick glance you'd give two kids sitting somewhere. It was longer than that. Still. Then he just kept moving. I didn't say anything to Kara about it. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't. That same afternoon, we found a trail behind the cabins that no one had mentioned to us. It wasn't marked on any of the little tourist maps my dad had picked up at the gas station. It was just a worn dirt path that disappeared into the trees. We didn't go far, maybe 100 meters before Kara said she was hungry, and we turned back. But before we did, I noticed a folding chair sitting between two trees, facing the trail. Not facing the lake, not facing any view, just the trail. There was a crushed can of something beside it. I thought maybe it was a hunter spot or something. I didn't mention it to my parents. The next evening, my dad drove to the gas station to grab some things for dinner. My mom was napping. Kara knocked on the door and asked if I wanted to go back on the trail before it got dark. I said okay. We walked further this time, maybe half a mile in. The trees were denser, and the light was going flat and gray above us. At some point, Kara grabbed my wrist and stopped walking. I looked at her. She was staring ahead. There was someone standing on the trail. It was a man, or at least I think it was. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out any detail. Just a figure, very still, standing in the middle of the path. I waited for him to move or wave or do literally anything to indicate that he was some hiker. He didn't. He stood there the same way a person stands when they've been standing there for a while, like they're used to waiting. Kara said very quietly, "Do you know him?" I said no. Neither of us ran. We just turned around and walked back, fast, not saying a word. I don't know why we didn't run. I've thought about that a lot. We didn't tell our parents. I still don't fully understand why. I think there's part of me that was afraid of how strange it would sound. There was a man standing in the woods. That's not a sentence that sounds like anything really, until it is. That night I couldn't sleep. I was sharing the pull-out couch with the window that faced the tree line. And around 2 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. I lay there for a minute in that half-consciousness state where anything feels slightly wrong, and you can't tell if it's you or the room. I looked toward the window. There was a shape standing near the tree line, just at the edge of where the dark started. I couldn't tell if it was a person, or a shadow, or something my half-asleep brain was constructing out of nothing. I told myself it was a tree. There were plenty of trees. I pulled the blanket up and stared at the ceiling, and eventually I fell back to sleep. We were supposed to leave on Sunday morning. On Saturday afternoon, both of our families went into town together to eat at the only diner within 30 miles. Kara and I finished eating before our parents and asked if we can walk around outside. They said yes, stay close, don't go far. We walked maybe 2 blocks before Kara spotted a narrow path behind the town's small hardware store that cut through a thin patch of trees toward the lakeshore. She wanted to see if it connected back. I said okay. Looking back, that was my first real mistake. The path was short, barely a quarter mile. We were maybe halfway through when I heard footsteps behind us, not far behind. I turned around and the man from the trail was there. At least I'm almost certain it was him. Same build, same stillness, except now he was moving, and he was close. Maybe 30 feet back, and he wasn't pretending to be a hiker anymore. Kara saw him the same second I did. Neither of us said anything. He started walking faster. I grabbed Kara's hand and we ran. Not the controlled, purposeful kind of running. The kind where your body just goes before your brain decides anything. I could hear him behind us. His footsteps heavier, faster, gaining. Kara was crying without making any sound, just tears. And I remember the sound of my own breathing being so loud. It didn't sound like me. The trees ended, and we broke out onto the lakeside road, and I screamed. I just screamed as loud as I could. A man washing his truck in a driveway maybe 50 feet away looked up. I screamed again and pointed back at the tree line, and he dropped what he was doing and jogged toward us. The footsteps behind us stopped. By the time the man from the driveway reached us, there was nobody on the path. Just trees. Just quiet. He walked us back to the diner himself, his hand on my shoulder the whole way. My dad and Kara's dad went back to look. They found nothing. No one. The local sheriff took a report and used the words like probably a jogger and hard to say, and these trails get a lot of use. We left the same night instead of the next morning. I've been back to Lake Arel once since then, about 2 years later, with a different group. I looked it up before we went, not for any specific reason, just out of habit. In the local community forum, I found a post from around the summer we'd visited, someone asking if anyone else had noticed a man who'd kept appearing near the rental cabins on the east side of the lake. There were a few replies. Most of them were dismissive. One of them just said, "Stay on the marked trails and don't go out after dark." Nobody replied after that. The thread was locked. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. The sheriff's words still sit with me. Probably a jogger. Joggers don't follow 12-year-old girls down empty paths at that kind of pace. Joggers don't disappear the second another adult shows up. I still think about the folding chair in the trees, facing the trail, just waiting. Someone had been watching that path for a while before we ever found it, and I don't think we were the first kids who did. My aunt and uncle have a vacation home about 2 hours outside of Nashville, right on the edge of a small lake. Every July, they'd invite the whole family out for a week. I was 19 that summer. and since most of my cousins were still little kids, my job was basically just to watch them while the adults did adult things. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't mind. Free food, a lake, and a week away from my part-time job stocking shelves. I'd done it the 2 summers before without anything weird happening. That summer felt normal at first. We got there on a Friday evening, unloaded everything, and my uncle started the grill while the kids ran straight for the water. I remember sitting on the dock watching them and noticed a man standing on the opposite bank. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking in our direction. I didn't think much of it. The lake wasn't private property. People walked the trail all the time. But he was there the next morning too. Same spot, roughly. Same posture. I pointed him out to my aunt. She said it was probably just a local who walked the trail every day. That made sense. I let it go. The second thing happened 2 days in. I was putting the younger kids to bed in the back room when my cousin Lily, who was 6, asked me who the man outside was. I asked her what she meant, and she pointed at the window. By the time I looked, there was nothing there. Just the dark tree line and the motion sensor light on the back porch that hadn't triggered. I told her it was probably just the shadows from the trees and tucked her in. She seemed satisfied with that. I wasn't really, but I didn't have a better explanation. The window was about 4 feet off the ground. Anyone standing close enough for a 6-year-old to notice would have to be right up against the glass. I didn't sleep great that night. The third thing was harder to brush off. On Wednesday, I took the kids on a little nature walk on the trail that looped around the back of the property. About 10 minutes in, Lily stopped and grabbed my hand. She whispered that she saw the man again. I looked where she was pointing, and I saw him too, maybe 30 yards back on the trail, just standing there watching us. I turned the kids around immediately and walked them back to the house fast without making it obvious I was panicking. When I mentioned it to my uncle, he actually went out to look. He came back and said there was nobody there, but he did find something that bothered him. A pile of cigarette butts at the base of the tree just off the trail. A lot of them, like someone had been standing in that spot repeatedly for a while. My uncle called the non-emergency police line that night. They said they'd have a car drive by a few times. That made the adults feel better. It didn't really make me feel better. The fourth thing happened Thursday night, and by this point my nerves were already stretched thin. I was the last one awake, watching something on my laptop in the kitchen table with my headphones in. At some point I looked up and noticed the small window above the sink was open about 3 inches. I hadn't opened it. I didn't know who had. I got up and closed and locked it, and stood there in the kitchen for probably 2 full minutes just listening. The house was quiet. Outside was quiet. I told myself someone had probably opened it for airflow earlier and forgotten. I went to bed with every light in the house on. What happened Friday night is the part I still have trouble talking about. I woke up around 2 in the morning needing water. That was it. Nothing dramatic. I just got up, half asleep, and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen in the dark the way I had every other night that week. I didn't turn a light on because I didn't want to wake anybody up. I was 3 steps into the living room before I realized someone was already in it. He was standing completely still near the far wall, right beside the sliding glass door, which was open about a foot. I don't know how long he'd been in there for. I don't know how he'd gotten through the door without waking anyone. I just know that when my eyes adjusted, he was there, and for one horrible second we were both completely frozen, just staring at each other across the dark room. I took a step back, and that was all the reaction he needed. He closed the distance between us in about 2 seconds, and got one other arm locked around my shoulders from behind and clamped his other hand over my mouth so hard my head snapped back against his chest. That hand was pressing so tight across my lips and nose that I had to fight just to breathe through it. I tried to make a sound anyway, and nothing came out. Not even close. It was just this muffled, useless pressure against the palm that nobody 3 feet away could have heard, let alone my uncle down the hall. He didn't say anything at first. He just held me like that, completely still, waiting to see if I'd keep struggling. Then he put his mouth close to my ear and said very softly, "Stop." I went still. I don't know if it was the voice or the fact that I couldn't breathe properly, or just my brain shutting down from pure shock. But I stopped moving, and he started steering me toward the sliding door, one step at a time, his hand still locked over my mouth the whole time. My brain was doing this horrible thing where it was completely clear and completely useless at the same time. I remember my right hand hanging free at my side, swinging slightly with each step, brushing the edge of the couch cushion as he pushed me past it. My fingers dragged across something wedged into the gap between the cushions. The TV remote. I don't know why I grabbed it. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a plan. My hand just closed around it on instinct, the way you grab a railing when you feel yourself slipping. And then without thinking, without deciding to, I jammed my thumb into every button I could find and held them all down at once. The television came on at full volume, some late-night infomercial just detonating into the room loud enough to rattle the windows. His whole body flinched, 1 second, maybe less. The hand over mouth shifted just a fraction, pulling slightly away from my nose as his arm tensed up. I bit down on his palm as hard as I possibly could. He made a short, sharp sound, and his hand came off my face. And I pulled forward out of his grip and sucked in the biggest breath of my life and screamed. Not a word, just a sound, the loudest thing I have ever produced. I felt it tear out my throat and fill the entire house. My uncle's voice came from the bedroom immediately, then his feet on the floor, then more voices, the kids crying, the whole house waking up at once like a switch had been flipped. The man was already at the sliding door. He looked back at me for a moment, and then he was gone into the dark. The police found him in the weeds by the water, about 100 yards by the bank. He had zip ties in his jacket pocket and a folding knife clipped inside his sleeve. They wouldn't tell us much more than that, and my uncle pushed for details over the following days. Eventually, someone let slip that the man had no connection to our family that anyone could identify. He'd apparently been in the area for at least a week. That part bothers me the most, honestly, because if he had no reason to specifically target us, the question is just exactly what he was planning and why he had kept coming back night after night to watch and wait instead of acting sooner. Nobody ever gave me an answer to that. I don't have a version of that night where I feel lucky. I just have the version where a TV remote was sitting in the right place at the right time, and I try not to think too hard about all the versions where it didn't.
I have this traumatic childhood memory that I cannot forget. Sometimes I dream about it or just think about it late at night when I can't sleep and I'm feeling stressed. It sucks, and I thought maybe posting about it might help me get over it a little. So I'm sending this to you today, and when I was a kid, we were always struggling for money. I feel like we moved houses maybe 6 or 7 times, usually a downgrade to a much cheaper property, even a trailer one time, followed by a big upgrade because my dad never lived within our means. As soon as he had a bit of dough, we started spending it, living in luxury. It was kind of sweet. He wanted to provide for me, my mom, and my baby brother, but he just wasn't good at keeping hold of money. When he had a good job, we'd get takeout food every day, and he'd shower us with toys and mom with gifts. Then we'd lose everything and end up in some dirty-ass trailer park or something, and everyone would be stressed. Dad would never take it out on us, but he'd take it out on himself, smoking and drinking and falling into a stupor, so it took longer to break out of the rut and find the next job. I never really knew what my father did for work. He didn't have a profession exactly. He took on random jobs and schemes pretty much. He was always looking for his latest get-rich-quick gimmick, and if I'd try to list or even remember most of them, I'd probably be here all night. One time, he sold cigarettes out of the back of his car until the law shut him down. Another time, he got a group of parolee friends working as home decorators until a client realized that he didn't have the necessary licenses and insurance when one of the guys fell through the roof. It was just things like this, all the time, and while he was a fun dad, it also made my childhood incredibly stressful, especially after my baby brother Barton was born and wouldn't stop crying all the time. The specific memory that sticks in my mind happened when we were renting a fairly nice house in the suburbs. I guess Dad's latest scheme had been paying off because things had been going well for a while and I was beginning to let myself relax. I remember the sun was setting, so that it must have been mid-evening when the knock on the door came. I knew my mom and dad were downstairs with Barton, so I was surprised when the knock sounded again and nobody answered. I looked out the window of my bedroom at the front of the house. A guy was standing at the door. He looked up at me and something about him terrified me. I know it's silly, but in my head I kind of equate him to that Rocksteady character from the Ninja Turtles. You know that big rhinoceros with a tank top, khaki pants, and big boots? This guy reminded me of him, only, human. He had this mullet that looked ex-army and an earring that kind of glinted in one ear and tattoos all up his thick, muscled arms. He must have caught sight of me looking at him because he looked up and kind of scowled at me from under a very thick, ugly unibrow. I know I'm probably imagining him as more troll-like and terrifying in my mind than he actually was, but I guess that's how childhood traumas kind of get at you, I guess. And now I'm going to call him Rocksteady, but he began hammering on the front door with a very meaty fist. He shouted that he knew we were home. He'd seen someone in the upstairs window. An instant terror and guilt flooded through me. Immediately I heard footsteps downstairs, Dad going to the front door and Mom coming upstairs. My bedroom door opened just as I heard the front door unlatch. Mom was holding Barton, reassuring me that everything was okay and to come back into the room and play. I ignored her and ran to the window. Dad had stepped outside into the front yard with Rocksteady, and Rocksteady was sizing up Dad, looming over him very menacingly. And my dad wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a buff guy who worked out. He was fairly short, and in my mind, he was fragile. He was always smiling and joking and being silly, and the idea of someone like Rocksteady hurting him seemed like a genuine possibility. Even more so as I watched this guy grab Dad by his shirt and drag him into the street. I started to cry and bang on the window, but Mom came and pulled me away and made me play with Barton for a bit, even though inside I was absolutely breaking. After 5 minutes or so, Mom had to use the bathroom, so I darted to the window again. Dad and Rocksteady were in the street. Dad was pacing back and forth, gesturing and talking animatedly in his way, and Rockstar seemed calmer and was leaning up against a muscle car. I watched as Dad and Rockstar shook hands, and then Dad came back into the house. He was all smiles and cheery after that. Nothing to worry about, he said. Just a simple misunderstanding. Rocksteady was a guy he worked with and his paycheck hadn't gone through, but it was all sorted out now and everything had been squared away. I told my dad that that man reminded me of the Rhino from Ninja Turtles, and he seemed to find that hilarious. I thought Mom was calm and fine too, but in retrospect, she clearly wasn't. I went to bed more relaxed that night. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard the crash. It was coming from downstairs, the sound of wood splintering and the front door being kicked in. I looked out the window in terror to see 3 men coming through our front door, and Rocksteady was taking up the rear. There was commotion from elsewhere upstairs, Mom and Dad reacting to the break-in, I now know, and then smashing and breaking glass from downstairs, and next, screaming and yelling. I could now hear 4 male voices, including my father's, and then my mom screaming. Finally, Barton started crying, adding to the cacophony, and Mom's footsteps came thundering upstairs. I'd already locked my door, and she rattled on it. I asked who it was, and she said it was Mom. She said it was good that I'd locked my door and to keep it locked and stay there, and she was going to take Barton into their room. She told me not to come out under any circumstances, and that Daddy was fine, and not to worry. His friends had just come over and they were just being loud. Even at my young age, I knew that this was all nonsense, but I told Mom I'd stay put. So I had to sit there on my bed listening to the 3 men smash up our things downstairs. Dad was yelling for a while, and then I heard another crash, and his voice stopped. I was crying to myself, these heavy sobs, and I felt like my chest was going to burst and my heart would explode. It felt like the chaos went on forever. Eventually, things fell silent and I thought I was safe. And suddenly there was a hammering on my door. The wooden frame shuddered and I screamed. A male voice I didn't recognize called out, telling me to open the door. I'll just call this one Creepshow. And he called me a little B-word and said that if I was Colin's daughter, Colin was my dad, I was gonna suffer. Creepshow started saying all these awful things he was going to do to me that I don't want to repeat here. Stuff that as a little kid I'd never even heard of before. I was still sobbing, crying, and freaking out. Then I heard a bang from out in the hallway, like someone punching a wall. A voice asked what the F Creepshow was talking about, and I recognized the voice as that Rocksteady guy. Creepshow said that Colin's daughter, the little B-word, was hiding in here and he was going to drag her out and show Colin what happened to the daughters of men who don't pay up. Rocksteady absolutely lost it. He started screaming at this guy, saying that I was only 7 years old and what kind of sicko threatens a kid. That they were just here to scare Colin to get what they were owed. But this was way over the line. Creepshow didn't back down and started hurling abuse at Rocksteady. There was a moment of silence, and then suddenly my door came splintering open. A man I didn't even recognize, who I later learned was Creepshow, flew backwards into the room, having just been drop-kicked probably through the door by that Rocksteady guy. And now Rocksteady rushed into the room, grabbed Creepshow from the floor, dragged him up and threw him out. He looked at me, and the terrifying guy I'd been so afraid of suddenly melted away, and his face softened. I've never seen someone transform like that before or since. Rocksteady told me he was sorry. He didn't really mean for things to go this way. And then he returned to beating the absolute crap out of Creepshow for daring to threaten a little girl like that. The outcome of this story is truly bizarre. Rocksteady genuinely felt so bad about bringing that kind of person to our house that he even offered to pay Dad for the damage. Dad was a bit bruised and scared, but ultimately okay. He didn't really want to call the cops because, well, whatever he was involved in probably wasn't very legal. Rocksteady and the other guy, who was just some sidekick that I'd never even saw, promised that they'd take Creepshow away and deal with him. Dad told us later that the three men were some bikers he'd hired to work on a project with him, and something had gone wrong with paying them apparently. He made things right with Rocksteady, and after that, Dad went completely straight. I guess it took my life being threatened to finally wake him up. Dad passed away recently, and he lived an honest life ever since that day. I have no idea what happened to Rocksteady or that Creepshow guy, and it's not Rocksteady who causes me to wake up at night, panicking and scared. It's Creepshow. The things he said to me through that door, the punishments he promised to beat out of me, they're not anything that a 7-year-old girl should ever have to hear. Now, I'm sure Creepshow isn't even alive anymore. When Rocksteady drop-kicked him through my bedroom door, he looked like he must have been in his 50s even then. He'd had to have been over 80 by now, so I can only hope that he died in pain and misery. But sometimes late at night, I imagine he's still out there, walking up the stairs to my bedroom door. And this time my dad and Rocksteady are no longer around to stop him. Many years ago now, when our son was barely out of diapers, me and my kid's mom moved into a real nice duplex out in the suburbs. It was on a quiet street, and the neighbors were quite friendly, and some even actually came over to help us unpack. Now, the guy in the home next door didn't show up, but when we heard that he was some elderly widower who didn't get around so easily anymore, we obviously gave him an instant pass. Now, our son Luke loved the big backyard and pool that we now had. He loved his new bedroom too, but what he didn't love was the big old closet with its sliding wooden doors. He seemed almost cautious of it right away. But then a few nights after we settled in, Luke started acting very strange about his new closet. At first, he said that he wanted to keep it open, so he could see that there were no monsters in there. But then later, he said that he wanted to sleep with it closed because someone was inside the closet and they would watch him whenever we left him alone. I thought that it was just the new house making him nervous, and that his big old imagination was just getting the better of him. And so that night, to help him feel safe, I started what became a regular bedtime routine. Every night I checked his closet for monsters. I opened the doors, rustled his clothes a little, and showed him how, aside from them, it was completely empty. I'd then shut the closet, tuck him into bed, and then maybe sit in the chair and read him a bedtime story until he fell asleep. It worked for him, and he slept like the dead from then on. But for me, that feeling of unease never entirely went away. Something about Luke's fear stuck in my mind, how sort of primal and authentic it actually seemed. His mom said it was probably nothing, just a father worrying too much about his over-imaginative son. But still, I kept checking the closet every night during our little routine, which I increasingly realized wasn't for him anymore, it was for me. Now, a little time went by, maybe 2 or 3 months, and I decided to give Luke's room a deep clean. The house was old, the kind of place where dust settled just about everywhere, so I vacuumed the carpet, wiped all the windows down, and cleaned under his bed, too. And then once I was done, I moved to the closet. As I swept the floor, I noticed something against the back wall. It was a little pile of sawdust, maybe an inch or two tall, piled near the back wall. Since I didn't remember seeing sawdust when we moved in, I pushed Luke's clothes aside and looked closer. And then, in that dim light, I saw it, clear as day. A small hole in the wall near the floor, about the size of a coin. There wasn't any light coming through at the time, but it was there all right. I remember my heart rate going into overdrive as these dual feelings of disgust and anger rose up inside me. The hole looked like it went straight through, so I grabbed a flashlight and shined it inside. And that's how I figured out that there was some kind of cover on the other side, something to hide it when it wasn't in use. But I knew someone could see through it if they removed the cover. The wall was shared with the neighbor's house, that elderly widower who lived on the other side of that duplex. I thought about them moving away the paper or card or whatever it was and watching my boy as he slept. And my hands shook as I thought about that. My son hadn't been imagining things. Someone really had been watching him. And so I sat back, staring at that hole. My head was pounding as 1,000 different thoughts raced around in my mind all at once. We never saw that widower much. He was mostly just sort of shadows moving behind curtains. But the thought of him watching my son made me feel sick to my stomach. But not just sick, angry too. I wanted to scream, to run next door and demand answers before taking some well-deserved retribution. But I stopped myself. I knew how it would end. If I confronted him, I wouldn't stay calm and I'd end up in jail for sure. I could feel the anger building, the kind that didn't stop. I'd hurt someone, or worse, for Luke's sake. I couldn't let that happen. I decided that I didn't want that guy to know that I knew, if that made any sense. I wanted to try and actually catch him doing something, maybe on camera, so I had actual evidence of the crime. I went to the garage, found some wood filler and a putty knife, and then worked fast to fill it in and cover it over. I then checked the wall for other holes, and when I didn't find any, I moved Luke's clothes back and swept away the sawdust. The closet looked normal again, but I didn't feel any better. What kind of person drills a hole to watch a child, and how the hell was I going to catch him in the act? My hands clenched into angry fists every time I thought about it, and I only stopped feeling murderously angry after I spoke to Luke's mom about it. And that night, I checked his closet like I always did. My son didn't know about the hole, and there was no way in hell that I was about to tell him on an account of not wanting to scare him. So I tucked him in, turned off the light, and watched him fall asleep as usual. But unlike him, I couldn't relax. Even though the hole was gone, I kept imagining the widower's eyes on the other side of the wall. I imagined him kneeling down and moving away the cover and cursing as he realized someone had gotten wise to his plan. A part of me thought that I'd have him backing off for a while, but I also knew that if he did it once, he was probably going to do it again. I started checking the closet more, during the day too. I'd slid the doors open and stare at the wall, waiting for something to happen or to hear something moving on the other side, but I never saw or heard anything. And the stress of it started to affect my sleep. I started locking the windows and back door every night, and something I never did before. I told myself it was to keep my son safe, but the truth is, I was scared too. Luke's mom felt the same way. She was furious, but she also knew that it was better not to escalate, as any sort of confrontation might go very wrong and very fast. If this guy was willing to drill a hole in the wall to spy on our kid, what else was he willing to do? I never felt the same in that house afterwards, and I never felt the same about that supposedly sweet old widower either. I wanted to catch him doing something, anything to prove what I knew. I paid to have some security cameras installed, which were super expensive compared to those Ring doorbells you can buy these days, and I thought that it'd be worth the investment, but the guy next door never did anything on any cameras. His house stayed dark, with his curtains always closed. I thought about calling the police purely just to warn them that I thought our neighbor was a creep. But not only had I removed what little evidence I had, I also wasn't sure how to phrase things to avoid sounding like some paranoid a-hole bullying his elderly neighbor. I felt like an idiot, and I still do, actually, but I kept quiet. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed, and I told myself it was just for home defense, but deep down, I knew I was ready to use it for home offense. If I heard someone in Luke's room, if I even so much as heard someone creeping around outside, I wouldn't hesitate. I even got excited about the idea of catching the guy, excited about the idea of smashing his head in, and that scared me almost as much as the hole. And after a couple of months went by and still nothing had happened, I started to relax a little. There had been no new holes, no strange noises. Luke hadn't talked about being watched in a while, and the only disturbed sleeps we got were when we'd had an unrelated nightmare. The routine definitely helped a lot in that continual process of checking the closet before tucking him in, but I never stopped checking that wall. I'd run my hand over the spot where the hole was, making sure it was still sealed, but it always was. And then one day I saw a truck outside the widower's house. No goodbye, no explanation, and the house stayed empty, and it took a while, but we actually heard that he'd passed away. And as horrible as it is to say, I actually felt relief. The hole was gone, and so was the sicko who put it in there. But the fact that it even happened in the first place, that there's people out there who'd think to do something like that, that's something I'll never be able to come to terms with. Me and my missus are writing to you today to tell you about an absolutely messed up trip to the United Kingdom that we took a few years ago. It was just after COVID travel restrictions had been lifted, so we were itching to stretch our legs and visit a foreign country, so we picked somewhere as far away from home as possible. We didn't really have a plan for our UK holiday. It seemed like a nice place, so we opened up a map of Britain, stuck it on the dartboard at the bar that I co-own with my brother, and I threw a dart at it. Well, we missed. And I would have had to vacation in the Bristol Channel, so we threw another one and landed on Sussex. We didn't know anything about Sussex, and apparently it's not really a massive tourist destination, but we picked the funniest sounding place that also seemed a bit touristy, Bognor Regis. We figured if it was crap, it wouldn't be too hard to shoot up to London early, which we planned to do for the second half of the holiday regardless. Bognor Regis was actually great. We hit the town in July, dead in the middle of the Australian winter, and despite what we'd heard about the UK, the weather was bonzer. Me and the missus spent our days sunbathing on the beach, buying crap from the seafront stores and getting sunburnt. Then, at night, we hit the bars and the clubs and tried our best to paint the quiet seaside town red. We made a bunch of friends at Bognor Regis, other tourists from all over the world, like Detroit, Belgium, Turkey, Birmingham, all sorts. One fellow that we met, he said his name was Rishi, like the then Prime Minister, which we all found really funny. Rishi was a wild party animal, and it was with Rishi that we got so drunk one night that we found ourselves lost in the middle of the countryside, unsure how to get back to Bognor Regis. Me and the missus were both absolutely wrecked, and we lost track of Rishi altogether. We were out in the middle of nowhere, with no idea how we'd even managed to get there. I have a vague memory of riding in a van with Rishi and some other guys drinking cheap beer, but now me and the missus were walking along a country road in the dark, singing God Save the Queen. Rest in peace, Liz. Eventually, we came across a 24-hour petrol station and a service station. There was a Costa Coffee, but it was closed, and a McDonald's staffed by a very bored-looking teenage boy. We bought some munchies and then wandered to the gas station to see if they had the number for a local taxi firm or some type of ride. The guy at the counter directed us to a notice board, which we struggled to read in our drunken state, but eventually found a business card from someone offering taxi services 24 hours a day. I called it up on my mobile, and a very polite young woman answered. I told her where we were at, described the service station, and she said that she knew exactly where to send a driver. She told us to look out for a silver Ford and that our driver would be named Mears. Half an hour later, a car pulled into the petrol station lot and a shifty-looking bloke gestured us over. I asked if he was Mears and he said, sure, why not? Now looking back, I can't be sure if we got into the right car. It's hard to get it clear in my head whether I'm just remembering things wrong or whether we really were this careless with getting into a car with a stranger. Either way, Mears, or whoever this crooked bogan was, did not have our best interests at heart. It wasn't immediately obvious. We had no bloody clue where we were, so we had no bloody clue that Mears was driving us in the total opposite direction to Bognor Regis. And by now, my missus had passed out and was snoring against my shoulder. I tried to make conversation with Mears from the back seat, but he suddenly pretended that he couldn't speak English. Weird, I thought. He'd understood me perfectly earlier. Or maybe I'd been so drunk that I just sort of slurred nonsense at him and he just sort of gone along with it. When we pulled up to a stop, I knew we definitely weren't in Bognor Regis. We were in the courtyard of some broken-down, filthy farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Still, I saw a chicken run across the dirt in the darkness and at least one goat peering at me eerily from beyond a fence. Lovely, I thought. Mears got out of the car and yelled something into the darkness. A dog began to bark furiously and a male voice called back. I peered through the front windscreen from the back seat, squinting into the darkness, and saw two fellas join Mears. Mears had his window down so I could hear them, even though I don't think he knew that I could hear them. Fear gripped me as I realized what they were talking about. Mears was saying that we were rich American tourists. We're Australians, you wanker, I wanted to yell, and that nobody knew where we were, so they could just do us over and dump us in the acid vats out back. Bloody Nora, I thought. I didn't much fancy that either. And neither did one of the men because he vehemently disagreed with Mears, slapping him around on the back of the head even. And at first I thought this meant Mears had been kidding around. But no. The other man said that they just wanted to do me in, but the missus should be handed over to Osama and his boys, and they'd know what to do with her. I swear on my old dad's grave, when I heard Osama, I thought that they were just larrikins. But then Mears said something like, sure, maybe they'll hook us up with some of their fine, and then a derogatory term that implied that he was talking about very young women. Next, I saw the glint of steel as one of the men unsheathed some huge blade. Right, this could totally ruck off. Machetes, grooming gangs, a matey called Osama? Not bloody likely. Not for me and the missus. And I didn't even think. Drunk as an absolute skunk, I clambered into the front of the Ford Escort. The Lord God above must have been looking out for me that night because Mears the moron had left his freaking keys in the ignition. For a second, I thought I was going to have a classic horror movie moment where the engine wouldn't take over and the car wouldn't start. But nah, luck was on my side. I gunned the engine and drove straight forward, even clipping Mears in the leg as he dived out of the way. Somehow, despite being a terrible driver even when sober, I managed to pull off a perfect U-turn and then send the car squealing, crashing out of the gate of the farmyard and onto the darkened country roads. I pushed that battered old Ford Escort to its absolute peak, breaking the speed limit for a good 20 minutes, hoping and praying that I'd encountered the law so they could pull me over and I could tell them everything. Eventually, I remembered the missus in the back. The lucky bird had slept through the entire thing and only now just started stirring, muttering and asking where we were and then telling me to slow down. Eventually, we found our way to a little village which had a 24-hour Tesco. Both our phones had run out of battery at some point in the night, so we went inside, and I told the poor old dear on the checkout that we'd almost been kidnapped by a grooming gang and could we possibly borrow the phone. I'd sobered up quite a bit by now, and I imagined I was still a total mess, and the missus was still rat-arsed. Now, long story short, the cops came, they searched some farmhouses in the area that could match the description I gave, but they didn't find anyone. And the car that we'd acquired had stolen plates and had been reported stolen a few years before. The cops impounded it, and for all I know, it's still in some impound lot today. The name Mears was apparently the name of a local taxi driver and had not been the guy whose car we'd gotten into. They were able to verify that the real Mears showed up at the petrol station shortly after we got into the wrong Ford. The cops did confirm one chilling fact, though. Osama was the first name of a suspect in a grooming gang case in the area. Unfortunately, our testimony didn't really help anything with that case, but I hope to God they got him. Me and the missus got off pretty lightly, all told. I still have friends who to this day insist that I got so drunk I imagined this whole thing, but I have copies of the police reports as a souvenir from our time in Bognor Regis to prove it. And I can only wish total ill will upon the men who intended to kill us, especially fake Mears. I hope it hurt when I hit you with your own car, and if you ever come to Australia, I'll happily feed you to a kangaroo, you tosser. Firstly, I want to begin the story by saying that I do think Egypt is a lovely country. It's populated by many wonderful people, and I have friends that are both immigrants and natives. I have visited the country again since the incident I'm going to tell you about, and I enjoyed my time there. Unfortunately, though, there's no avoiding the fact that attitudes to women in Egypt can be unpleasant. Things are a bit more relaxed in the country in 2025, but when this occurred in 2011, it could be extremely risky for a woman to walk around by herself, especially uncovered. A lot of Egyptian women wear hijabs or niqabs, covering their hair or almost everything apart from their eyes. Of course, Western non-Muslim women visiting Egypt just dress how they normally would, but this can be dangerous and downright stupid if you're alone. And as such, when I first visited Cairo, it was strongly advised that young women cover up as much as possible, make sure that they're with a male chaperone, and stick to the touristy areas. I was most excited about seeing the pyramids and exploring the deserts, and I wasn't even particularly thrilled about spending a few nights in central Cairo before we began our proper tour. Our tour guides insisted that it was totally worth it though, and we needed to experience the city to experience Egypt. As I followed the tour group through the bazaars, taking in the sights, the sounds, and the smells, I was starting to get won over. My dad was engaged in animated discussion with one of the guides, and they become fast friends. Mom just seemed happy to look at the rugs and ornaments for sale, and all the other middle-aged tourists were cooing and awing over the sights. I was the only young woman in her early 20s, and there was a guy my age on the tour group too, but he'd opted out of this afternoon's city tour due to food poisoning, which was really because he was hungover from the night before. Nobody was really paying attention to me, nor did I to them, which is why I didn't notice at first when I lost sight of the tour group. At first I didn't panic. They couldn't have gone far. But when I turned down the next alleyway and found myself in a crowd of unfamiliar Egyptian faces, it did cause me to pause. A few of the older male store owners were looking at me a little strangely, their eyes traveling up and down my body, even though I was wearing jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt, the best compromise I could make in this heat. I got pulled along by the throng of the crowd, and before I knew it, I'd been kind of forced into another side of the alley, ducking out of the flow of people just so I could get my bearings. A few young men stood in a doorway, and I knew immediately that they were trouble. They sort of strutted over towards me in the way that certain guys do, and the way they studied my body made the previous store owners look reserved. They looked at me with a barely disguised hunger, and I swear to God, one of them even licked his lips. They started talking to each other in Arabic, and I couldn't understand what most of them had said, but recognized the word for cattle or cow and girl. One of them said something that caused the others to hoot and clap his buddy on the shoulders. I quickly apologized for disturbing them, which was a mistake. I shouldn't have acknowledged them or made eye contact. Before I could step back out of the alley, one of them grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me deeper into the shadows. My blood immediately ran cold. I knew exactly what they wanted to do to me and what the things that they were saying meant. One of them pinned my arms behind my back, while another one started to lift my t-shirt, running his fingers over my stomach. I felt sick and knew that this was it. If I didn't do something now, then this was going to be an event that would define the rest of my life, whether I wanted it to or not. I drew on all my self-defense training and slammed my body back into the guy holding my hands. He hit the wall with a thud, letting go of my wrists. Using the momentum, I kicked forwards at the guy who had been touching me, slamming his head backwards against the first guy's nose as I did so. I heard a crunch and a scream, and quickly pulled free as two of the guys howled in pain. The third guy had been watching, but he was the one that started to chase. I had no idea where I was running to or how I could find safety. There was every chance that I'd just run into more angry young men who were looking to tear me apart. I can't even describe the chase because it was all some blur. All I know is that the man chasing me grabbed my hair and shirt at least a few times, including one where he tore a chunk of the hair out of my scalp, causing me to cry out in pain. It felt like I'd never escaped him. Everywhere I went, crowds were surging forward, and it was only later that I learned that I was on the outskirts of a goddamn armed riot. And I think that's what saved me. Eventually, I burst into a courtyard and saw my parents and the tour group. They all looked frantic and defensive, and I guess that's why our one tour guide who'd befriended my dad was holding a brick. He barely paused as I came sprinting into the courtyard, followed by a guy who was clearly chasing me. The tour guide pulled back his arm and let his brick fly straight and true. I heard it hit my pursuer's head with a loud, hollow clunk, and he just sort of dropped to the floor like a discarded sack of potatoes. The tour guide said it was better that we got out of here because something was clearly going down. So he and the other guide led us down some more side streets and away from what he explained was turning into a full-scale riot. I asked if we should tell the cops about the guys who tried to assault me, and he just sort of laughed. We made it back to the hotel, which was gated and had armed guards. The next day, it was time for the tour group to move on anyway, and we spent the rest of the vacation at a luxury resort near the pyramids, where we lounged by the pool, relaxed, and went on various day trips to ancient historic sites of interest. Now, I love Egypt, and like I say, I've been back there since, but this was the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and one that could have changed my life, all because some people see others as less than human.
I'm 16, and this happened about 7 months ago, and I still think about it almost every single day. I want to start by saying I was not being careless, and I want to say that because the first thing people do when they hear something like this is look for the part where you made the obvious mistake. The part where you should have known, and yeah, looking back there were signs, but in the moment every single one of them had a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I think that's what makes it so terrifying. It didn't feel like a horror story while it was happening. It felt completely normal right up until it didn't. It was a Tuesday night in early spring. I'd stay late after school for a study group that ran longer than expected, and by the time we wrapped up, it was almost 8 o'clock. My mom was supposed to pick me up, but she'd gotten stuck at work and was running about 40 minutes behind. I told her it was fine that I'd wait outside. I was sitting on the front steps of the school scrolling through my phone when a car pulled up to the curb. Dark blue sedan. Nothing distinctive about it at all. The window rolled down and a man leaned over from the driver's seat and said my name. I looked up. He looked familiar immediately. I couldn't place him exactly in that first second, but I knew his face. Or I thought I did at least. He had that kind of look that could belong to a dozen different people. Medium build, maybe late 30s, with light brown hair. Completely ordinary. He smiled and said he was a friend of my uncle's, that my uncle had asked him to swing by and grab me since my mom was stuck. And here is where I want to be really precise because this part matters. My uncle Darren and my mom talk constantly. He helps her out all the time, picking me up from things, dropping things off, whatever she needs. It was not even slightly unusual for him to send someone on his behalf if he was busy. It had happened before. Not with this specific person, but the concept was not foreign to me. I asked his name and he said it was Rick. He said my uncle would explain everything and that he was parked right there if I wanted to call my mom first. I did try to call her, but it went to voicemail, which also wasn't unusual because she works in a hospital and can't always pick up. I sent her a text saying a friend of Uncle Darren's was giving me a ride and got in the car. We pulled away from the school, and for the first 2 or 3 minutes, everything was completely fine. He made small talk, asked how school was going, mentioned my uncle by name a couple more times, and seemed totally relaxed. I was on my phone, half paying attention. Then I noticed we weren't going the right way. My house is north of the school. We were heading south. I told myself maybe he was taking a different route, avoiding traffic or construction or something. I looked up from my phone and watched the streets going by. Nothing looked immediately wrong, but the direction was definitely wrong. I asked him where we were going, and he said he had to make a quick stop first and that it would only take a few minutes. Something in me shifted right then. Not panic yet, just a quiet wrongness settling somewhere in my chest. I asked him what kind of stop. He said he had to drop something off at a friend's place real quick and then he'd take me straight home. Texted my mom again, and no response. Then I texted my Uncle Darren directly. Hey, did you send someone named Rick to pick me up? A few minutes went by. We turned off the main road onto a smaller one. Less lit, fewer houses. My uncle replied, What? No, who is this? My stomach dropped so fast I felt physically sick. I looked at the man driving, and in that moment I understood completely that I did not know him. I had never known him. Whatever familiarity I thought I'd seen in his face when he pulled up had been something my brain constructed because he said the right words and I'd been staying in the dark and it all fit together just neatly enough. I did not let on anything that had changed. This is the part I'm most grateful for in hindsight because my instinct was to scream or to demand he stop the car, and I didn't do that. I just kept looking at my phone and kept my voice completely even and asked how much longer the stop was going to take because my mom was expecting me. He said, Not long. I told him I got car sick sometimes on smaller roads and asked if we could take the main road instead, just to see what he'd say. He said this way was faster. I texted my uncle back. The man picked me up from school saying you sent him. We're heading south on Greer Road, I think. I don't know him. Please call Mom and call the police. My hands were shaking so bad I had to retype it twice. I turned my face down on my leg so he couldn't see the screen light up if my uncle called back. Kept my breathing as steady as I could manage. I was looking at the door handle, looking at how fast we were going, running through every option I had and crossing them off one by one. Jumping from a moving car on a dark road felt worse than staying put. Screaming him felt like it would accelerate whatever this was. My best option was to stay calm and wait for a moment where the car slowed down or completely stopped. He turned onto an even smaller road, gravel now, trees on both sides. I felt my phone vibrate against my leg and I didn't look. He slowed the car down and I didn't wait to find out why. The second the speed dropped enough, I pulled the door handle and shoved the door open and I jumped out. I hit the gravel hard and felt my palms and one knee tear open, but I was already running before I fully registered the pain. I ran into the tree line on the right side of the road and just kept going, crashing through brush in the dark. No idea where I was going, just away. I heard his car door open behind me, heard him call my name once, almost calm like he was mildly annoyed. Then I heard his footsteps on the gravel and I ran harder. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like a long time. I eventually came out on the other side of the trees onto a lit road and just started waving at the first set of headlights I saw. A woman in her 40s pulled over and I must have looked insane. Scraped up and hyperventilating, and she immediately told me to get in and lock the doors. My uncle had already called the police by then. My mom had seen my text and called them too. Officers were already looking for the car when the woman drove me to the nearest gas station and waited with me until they arrived. They found the car abandoned about 2 miles from where I jumped out. No sign of him. The plates came back to a vehicle report stolen 3 weeks earlier. The description I gave led to some investigation, but as far as I know, he was never identified. Nobody could figure out how he knew my name, or knew I'd be standing outside the school that night, or knew enough about my family to mention my uncle convincingly. The last part is what keeps me up at night, more than anything. The rest of it I can almost rationalize. People do random terrible things, but he knew my name. He knew my uncle's name. He knew that my mom was supposed to pick me up and that she was running late. Somebody had been watching me for long enough to know all of this, and I have absolutely no idea who or for how long or why they just stopped at that. I don't wait outside alone anymore. Not for anything, literally. I don't get into cars without confirming everything through multiple people first. I know those sound like obvious things to say, but I promise you when somebody pulls up and says the right words and looks vaguely familiar and smiles at you like everything is completely normal, it is so much easier than you think to just believe them. But I got lucky. The car slowed down at the right moment and I was close enough to trees and I ran fast enough. I really try not to think about what would have happened if any of those things had been different. I'm 24 and I do house sitting on the side whenever I need extra money. I found most of my jobs through an app and had done it probably 15 times before this with 0 issues. This house was the nicest one I'd ever been hired for. One of those gated neighborhoods where every lawn looks perfect and every car in the driveway costs more than you'll ever make in a year or two. The couple who hired me were in their 60s, going to France for 3 weeks. The wife had called me once before the job, and she seemed totally normal, organized, and friendly. Left me a printed sheet on the counter with everything I needed to know. Water the orchards every 3 days, bring in the mail, the pool guy comes Wednesday, and the guest room upstairs was made up for me. Simple stuff, really. The first 2 days were genuinely great. The bed was nicer than mine at home, the kitchen was stocked, and the neighborhood was dead quiet. I worked my remote job during the day and sat by the pool at night. Pretty easy money. On the third day I went to water the orchards, and the soil was already wet. I stood there for probably a full minute just holding the pod. I hadn't watered them yet. I knew I hadn't because I'd been putting it off and had a reminder set on my phone for that exact morning. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe some kind of irrigation system. Maybe I was misremembering. I put it down and walked away. That same evening I opened the fridge and things had been moved around. I know how that sounds, but I'm weirdly specific about how I organize a refrigerator, and I had rearranged this one when I got there. The orange juice I kept on the left was on the right. Leftovers I'd pushed to the back were at the front. I checked every door and window in that house. Everything was locked. The alarm panel showed no entries, alerts, or anything. I called my friend and talked for about an hour, and she convinced me I was just in an unfamiliar place and my brain was just doing too much. I went to bed and mostly believed that. At 2 a.m, I woke up to the sound of a door closing somewhere below me. I laid there without moving and just listened. Nothing after that. I told myself it was the house settling or the pool equipment outside. I laid there for maybe 20 more minutes and then got up because I wasn't going to sleep without checking. I went through the whole upstairs first. Empty. Went downstairs and through the living room and kitchen and dining room. Everything also looked fine. Then I walked past the basement door and stopped. There was a thin line of light underneath it. I had tried that door my first day and it was locked. The instructions said nothing about the basement. I just assumed it was storage and left it alone. I stood in that hallway staring at that line of light and I genuinely could not move for a few seconds. I went back upstairs, locked my bedroom door, pushed the dresser against it, and texted the emergency number I'd been given, asking if anybody else had access to the house. A few minutes later my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. A man answered, said he was the husband. Said they hadn't been able to make the France trip and had come home 2 days ago. Said his wife meant to message me and forgot, and also said they'd been in the master bedroom and were trying to give me my space. I asked him why he didn't just knock on my door and say hello when they got back. He paused. Then they said they didn't want to make things awkward. I asked about the light under the basement door. Another pause, but much longer. Said it was just a utility light that stays on all the time. I sat there in the dark on that bed and something just would not let me relax about any of it. Pauses and the answers that were just a little too weird. The idea that 2 people had been moving around that house for 2 days while I slept, going into the kitchen, watering the plants, close enough to walk into any room they wanted. I told him I'd be heading out in the morning. He said he understood and I'd be paid the full amount. I didn't sleep at all. At 6 a.m, I packed everything, moved the dresser and walked downstairs. I was almost at the front door when I looked down the hallway. The basement door was open, just a few inches. The light was off this time, and there was somebody standing just inside it in the dark, not moving, just standing there in the gap watching me from across the hallway without making a sound. I walked out the front door and drove straight home. When I reported it, the app found that the account used to hire me was fake. They tracked down the real owners to the address. The actual people had been in France the entire time. They had no idea anyone was in their house. Whoever hired me was not them. I don't know who was in that house. I don't know how many of them there were. I don't know what was in that basement or how long they had been living there before I showed up or what they actually wanted. I just know that whatever was standing in that doorway at 6 a.m. had been there the whole time I was asleep upstairs, yet it never once made a sound. For a little backstory to explain, I'm a delivery driver for Uber Eats and have been doing it as a side gig for the past year or so to earn some extra money. Also, I'm a girl. Anyway, yeah, Uber Eats. It's a super chill job, although pay is definitely not ideal, especially at night. Normally, any pings I get after 10 p.m. are just crappy fast food orders to customers where the chances of being tipped are even lower than what they already are, which is pretty low. I would say 2 in 10 people tip on Uber Eats. Anyways, late night deliveries. Rarely profitable, which is why I would barely do them. However, on this night last year, there was a bonus going on. Reach 15 deliveries in a certain time frame to get an extra $75, which was music to my ears. When that's the case, late night deliveries rock because there's no traffic and it doesn't matter where you're picking up from. McDonald's, bring on the bonuses. The faster you can get them done, the faster you get to go home and knock out. Open roads all the way works for me. I was on a roll and finished my last run at 2:30 in the morning, cashed my bonus and called that a night. For context, this took place in downtown San Diego. There are a lot of fun restaurants and clubs at the core, but as you branch out it gets more seedy. Once you get past 16th Street, it gets really sketchy. Lots of homeless camps, the works. I actively try to avoid that area, but in order to get back home and on the freeway, I had to pass through that neighborhood. One more piece of info. I drive a crappy 2002 Ford Focus, and nothing's automatic. In order to roll the windows up or down, you have to reach over and crank the lever. Because it's a hassle to roll them up and down manually each time, when I do deliveries, usually I just keep both my windows rolled down because it's easier to pick up and deliver through the windows. This night, I had my windows down as usual. I was planning to roll them up before I passed 16th Street, where the homeless camp was, but didn't get that far. As I turned down a side street heading towards the main drag, up ahead I see a man in one of those orange reflective construction vests, standing on the side of the road. There's always some sort of construction going on downtown, and it's pretty common for it to happen at night, so I didn't really pay much attention. As I get closer, though, the man runs into the middle of the street, waving his arms, signaling to stop. I start to slow down, thinking he's going to direct traffic or reroute me or something. I brake to 10 miles per hour, then 5, leaving distance, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. He breaks out into a jog towards my car and stops directly in front of it, blocking me and my car from moving forward. Immediate unease here. This was weird. I'm wishing my windows were rolled up. It's 3 a.m. on a dark street, and there's not a soul around except for me and this dude. People talk about fight or flight, and I've always wondered how I would react in a situation that warranted a similar response. Now I know my reaction is to freeze, because as I was slowing down, it hit me 5 seconds later than it should have. This guy is not a construction worker. He has on a hard hat and a vest, and the creepiest smile I've ever seen in my life. At first I thought he was smiling to be friendly, but smiling to acknowledge someone longer than a few seconds is super unnerving, especially in this context. Try it right now. Count to 5 in your head while smiling and you'll see what I mean. That's what this guy was doing. Now that he's in front of me, I can tell he's homeless. That or just, I don't know. Older guy, I would guess 60s, but homelessness has a way of making everybody look old, so who knows really. But he's just staring at me, wide-eyed and smiling, all teeth. Honestly, his smile and mannerisms, the best way I can describe it is as Twisty from American Horror Story. Google him if you want to. No pressure if you don't. Literally though, the guy looked insane. I obviously should have reversed, but my brain was panicking and I didn't think that fast. I'm frozen in my car thinking this is how I die. This whole time he's not saying anything, just leering. Then like a ninja, he jumps onto the hood of my car and slams his fist against my hood. I'm frozen in terror just watching this guy. He starts pounding on the hood of my car, crawling around on his hands and knees, not saying anything, just crawling and staring at me. That was the most terrifying part, because he never broke eye contact once during all of this and never stopped smiling. The thought of my windows being open made me want to throw up, but at the same time, breaking eye contact and moving to roll them up felt scarier, like if I made any sudden moves or looked away, he would try to come inside the car. He never said a word. I think it would have been less scary if he said something, but he didn't. He just pounded his fist on the car and stared. In all reality, this whole encounter probably lasted 15 seconds, but it felt like way longer. I am obviously freaking out here, and before I can gain the sense to do anything remotely intelligent, I see headlights in my rearview mirror coming up from behind me from down the street. This man sees them too, and in an instant, he jumps off my car and breaks into a run behind me, heading toward the new car. I floor it and don't look back until I'm halfway home on the freeway, and at this point, it's all adrenaline. For a long time after that, I stopped delivering at night. I sure as heck don't do that section of downtown anymore. Take the longer route home, and I don't drive with the windows down at night if it's in an area even remotely run down. What I realize from this is how naive I can be to just automatically trust or obey someone just because they have a uniform. Like, I didn't even question slowing down at first, even though the situation was clearly sketchy. The opposite, actually. In my mind, I was comforted by the fact that somebody trustworthy was on the road. Subconscious thoughts went like, oh nice, a public servant doesn't want me making a wrong turn. By the time I stopped, it would have already been too late if this guy wanted to attack me. I shudder thinking about that. I calmed down eventually by reassuring myself that this was probably just a crazy dude on drugs who meant no harm, which hopefully is the case, and for my own peace of mind, I'm going to believe that it is. What got to me is the fact that this guy was dressed as a road worker on the road and deliberately behaving at first in a way to lead me to believe he was one. Why else wear that kid up, and why are you trying to pull cars over? Just to freak people out? I don't know the answer, and I'm glad I didn't find out what it was that he wanted from me. Oh, and as a PSA, obviously this rarely happens, but just be aware. If a serial killer wanted to get you alone at night, what a smart way to get someone to stop for you. Literally just tell them to stop.
My name is Daniel. My wife Priya and I moved into our first home together in the fall. We're both Indian, first-generation Americans, and we'd spend most of our lives being told if you worked hard enough, you could build something real in this country. We believed that. We still want to believe that. It was a quiet street in rural Tennessee. Mature oak trees, clean sidewalks, houses spaced just far enough apart that you felt like you had privacy. We'd been saving for 4 years to afford even something this modest, and when we finally got the keys, Priya cried in the driveway. I remember thinking this was the beginning of everything. The neighbor to our right was a retired school teacher named Beverly who brought banana bread the day we arrived. The couple across the street waved from their porch. For the first few days, it felt like a place where people looked out for each other. The man next door to our left was named Raymond. We found that out later. The first thing I noticed about Raymond's house was the garden, immaculate in a way that felt obsessive. Every edge trimmed perfectly, every plant equidistant from the next. The kind of garden that tells you the person tending it has a lot of time and a very particular mind. The house itself was clean, freshly painted shutters, not a thing out of place. It should have looked welcoming. Somehow it didn't. We didn't see Raymond for the first 5 days. His truck was there every morning, still there every night. No movement through the windows, no sound from the yard. Priya mentioned it first, casually, the way you bring something up that's been sitting in the back of your mind. Do you think he's okay in there? I told her some people were just private. The first time I saw him was a Sunday afternoon. I was mowing the lawn and I felt something shift in my peripheral vision. I looked toward his house, and there he was, standing just inside his front doorway, not waving, just standing in the shadow of his hallway with his arms at his sides, watching me. I raised a hand. He didn't move. After a few seconds, he stepped back into the dark, and the door slowly swung shut. I told myself some people were just awkward. I mostly believed it. The thing that started bothering me was the timing. Every morning, Raymond was at his kitchen window when I backed out the driveway, not doing dishes, just standing with both his hands on the counter, watching the street. When I made eye contact, he held a second too long before turning away slowly, like he was deciding to. Priya told me she felt watched on her morning runs. A few times she'd glanced back from a block away and seen someone standing at the end of our driveway. By the time she got home, no one was there. I asked Beverly about him. She went quiet in a practiced way. She said he'd lived there for a long time, that his wife had left years ago. Before going back inside, she said, "Just be careful about being too friendly. He takes things the wrong way." I replayed that sentence for days. A few weeks in, Priya found our backyard gate open 2 mornings in a row. We started using the secondary bolt. The third morning, that was open too. I confronted Raymond the next evening, kept it neighborly, told him about the gate, asked if he'd seen anything. He smiled the whole time I spoke, a smile that never quite landed right on his face. Said kids cut through the yard sometimes. Then he paused and looked me over. "Where are you two from, anyway?" "We grew up here," I said. "We're American." He smiled wider at that, like I'd said something naive. "No, I mean originally. Where are your people from?" I told him India, because it was easier than explaining a lifetime of that question. He nodded slowly. "Long way from home," he said. Then he turned and went inside before I could respond. I stood on his porch for a moment, not sure what had just happened. I went home and didn't tell Priya about that last part. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. 2 nights later, I found one of our patio chairs moved from the back corner of the yard to directly beneath our bedroom window. The dew on the grass was undisturbed, except for a faint trail leading from Raymond's fence line. I took a photo. My hands were steady, but something in my chest was not. When I showed Priya, she didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, "Daniel, I want cameras." We ordered them that morning. The dinner was Priya's idea. She thought extending an olive branch might settle things. I didn't agree, but didn't fight it. We invited Raymond over on a quiet weeknight. For the first 30 minutes, it was almost normal. He complimented the house, asked about our jobs. Seemed pleasant enough that I felt like I'd imagined everything. Then he looked around the room, at the framed photos, the small figurine of Ganesha on the bookshelf, the kurta Priya was wearing, and something shifted on his face. "You're really settling in," he said. It wasn't a compliment. "It's our home," Priya said. "This street's been the same for 30 years. Same families, same way of doing things." He picked up his glass. "Change is hard for people around here. You'd understand that better if you were actually from here." "We are from here," I said. He shook his head slowly, patiently, like he was explaining something to a child. "No, you really aren't. There's an order to things. A way a neighborhood feels when it belongs to the people who built it." He looked directly at me. "Some places just aren't meant for everyone. There's nothing stopping you from finding somewhere more suited for your kind." Priya set her fork down very carefully. The small, deliberate gesture told me everything about how hard she was working to hold herself together. "I think it's time for you to leave," she said. Raymond nodded like he expected that, stood without hurrying, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "I've lived on this street a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than most people remember. And every single person who didn't belong here eventually figured that out." He smiled one last time. "Have a good night." The door clicked shut behind them. We didn't sleep much that night. We lay in the dark talking in low voices about whether to leave, whether staying meant something, whether leaving just meant surviving. We went in circles until we stopped talking and just listened to the house settle around us. We were gone within 2 months. I still think about Raymond. Not every day, but often enough. I still think about how careful he always was, how he never gave us anything concrete, nothing we could take to anyone and have it mean what it actually meant. I don't know what the chair under the window was for. I don't know how many nights we slept through things we were better off not knowing about. I don't know what Raymond would have done if we'd stayed. I only know that some people have decided, long before you arrive, that you don't belong, and they will wait, quietly and patiently, for as long as it takes to make you feel it. I've gone back and forth about whether to share this. It's been about 2 years now, and I still think about it more than I should. My therapist says writing about it might help. I don't know if I believe her, but here I am. My name is Marcus. In the spring of 2022, my girlfriend Diane and I moved into a rental on Pembroke Lane, a little residential street on the outskirts of a mid-sized city. The kind of neighborhood where people mow their lawns on Saturday mornings and wave from their driveways. The house was a modest 2-bedroom, with the sunroom Diane immediately claimed as her art studio. I remember her spinning around in it the day we toured the place, arms stretched wide, laughing. I hold on to that image now because of everything that came after. The neighbors directly across the street were named Tom and Sylvia Harding. Tom introduced himself the second day we were there, jogging across the street while I was unloading boxes. Big warm smile, firm handshake, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looked like he coached Little League on the weekends. Sylvia came over that evening with homemade jam and a welcome card written in careful, looping handwriting. She was soft-spoken and pretty, with dark circles under her eyes I assume were just tiredness. They seemed like genuinely good people, the type of neighbors you felt lucky to have. For about a month, everything was fine. Then things started feeling slightly off. The kind of off you don't immediately name. Sylvia stopped coming outside. I'd see Tom leaving for work, coming home, chatting easily with other neighbors. But Sylvia, who had been gardening in the front yard when we first arrived, who'd seemed just as warm as him, simply disappeared from view. Her car sat untouched in the driveway for days at a stretch. I mentioned it to Diane, and she said that maybe the woman worked from home and was introverted. That made sense. I let it go. Then one night around 2 a.m., I went downstairs for water and looked out the kitchen window toward their house. Every light was off, but Tom's silhouette was visible in the upstairs window, completely still, just standing there looking out. I watched for almost a minute before I made myself walk away. About 6 weeks in, I ran into Tom at the end of our driveways and asked how Sylvia was doing. His answer came instantly, too smoothly. Oh, she's been dealing with some health stuff, keeps her pretty low energy. He smiled the whole time. Not the warm smile from the first day, something flatter behind the eyes. He changed the subject immediately, and I let him, because what else do you do? I almost left it alone after that. What stopped me was a Sunday afternoon when I was reading near the front window and saw the upstairs curtain at their house shift, just barely. And in the gap, a hand pressed flat against the glass. A woman's hand. It stayed for a few seconds, then was gone. That was all. But it sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of the day. After that, I started paying closer attention and hated myself for it. I noticed Tom was handling all the groceries alone. I noticed Sylvia's name had been replaced on the mailbox with just T. Harding in fresh marker. One evening walking past, I heard what sounded like crying from somewhere inside. Brief, then nothing. I drafted a call to the non-emergency line in my head a dozen times. I think something might be wrong with my neighbor. A hand against the window. A mailbox label. It just sounded absurd. Diane thought I was spiraling. Then Tom knocked on our door one evening with a bottle of wine, just being neighborly. He was perfectly pleasant, asked about Diane's art, made easy small talk. But at some point he looked at me and said, almost amused, "You know, I've noticed you watching the house sometimes." I stammered something about sitting near the window out of habit. He laughed and said he understood. Then he left. I stood in my kitchen and couldn't move for a full minute. That night I called. I told the dispatcher everything. The hand, the crying, the mailbox, the months without seeing Sylvia, Tom's comment. An officer came the following afternoon for a welfare check. Tom answered on the first knock. Calm, cooperative, easy, smile already in place. The officer went inside. I watched from the window, barely breathing. 10 minutes passed. Then I saw the second patrol car turn onto Pembroke Lane. Then a third. Then I saw an ambulance moving with that quiet urgency that feels worse than sirens. I was outside before I decided to move. Tom was in handcuffs by the time I reached my driveway, still composed, no struggling. That same flat expression, like a man accepting the minor consequences of a minor miscalculation. He never looked across the street at me. Not once. I found out what happened in pieces. The responding officer, during his walkthrough of the upstairs hallway, noticed a deadbolt on the outside of a bedroom door, the kind of lock with no logical purpose, except to keep someone in. He called it in before he even opened the door. Sylvia Harding was on the floor of that bedroom, chained by the ankle to a radiator pipe, severely dehydrated, disorientated, with injuries consistent with months of prolonged abuse. The curtain near the window was displaced at the edge, just enough of a gap for a hand to reach the glass. She'd been up there the entire time, while I read on my couch, while Diane painted in her sunroom, while Tom jogged across driveways with his warm smile and his welcome jar of jam. Tom had been sending messages from Sylvia's phone himself to her family, her friends, the officer from the first welfare check. Carefully composed, naturally spaced, warm enough that nobody pushed back. A performance maintained for months without a single visible crack. Sylvia survived. I want to say that clearly. She was hospitalized for a long time and I never saw her again after that day, which I think was the right outcome. Tom was charged. I followed the case until I had to stop for my own sake. Diane and I moved out shortly after. The lease made it necessary, and neither of us could have stayed regardless. Some places hold the shape of what happened in them. I think about the version of this where I listened to Diane, where Tom's whine and his easy manner were just convincing enough, where I never made the second call. That version of this story has an ending I can't look at directly. My name is Mara, and I'm going to tell you about the 6 weeks I spent in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in Chicago that I will never go back to, even if someone paid me. I was 26, and had just taken a new job downtown. I found the place fast because I needed somewhere close to the office, and the rent was reasonable. The building was old, but kept up well enough. 6 units, 3 floors, 1 on each side of the hall per floor. I had 3B. A woman lived across the hall in 3A. I knew she existed because I could hear her sometimes through my door, heels on hardwood, the occasional murmur of the television. I never once saw her face. I only know she was a woman because the landlord mentioned it when I moved in. The first 2 weeks were completely normal. I was exhausted from starting a new job, learning new systems, commuting. I came home, made food, watched something on my laptop, and slept. Older buildings have sounds. Pipes knock, floors settle, radiators hiss. None of that scared me. I was the kind of person who needed logical explanations for things, and usually I could find one. The first thing I noticed was the light. My apartment door had one of those old-fashioned gaps at the bottom, maybe half an inch between the door and the floor. At night, the hallway light shone through in a thin yellow strip. I noticed it the first night, and then thought nothing of it. It was the kind of detail you clock in once, and then stop seeing entirely, until one night around week 3. I woke up at 2 in the morning for no reason. I lay there in the dark looking toward my door out of habit. The light strip was there, same as always, and then it wasn't. 2 dark patches broke the line of light, the unmistakable shape of 2 feet standing just outside. I watched them for what felt like 5 full minutes. They did not shift, did not step away. Still, I got up and crossed the room. I put my eye to the people. The hallway was empty. I felt both relieved and more unsettled somehow, because if no one was out there, what had I been looking at? It happened again 2 nights later. Same time, same stillness. I looked through the people fast enough that if someone had been there, they wouldn't have had time to move. The hallway was empty again. I started sleeping with a pillow over my head. Then came the smell. Faint, slightly sweet, like something left out too long. It appeared one evening when I got home and got stronger over the following nights. My landlord sent maintenance. They found nothing. They said maybe a mouse in the walls. I accepted that because I needed something to accept. The scratching started after that, slow and deliberate. From the wall beside my bed, 3 scratches, a pause, then 3 more. Always 3. I don't know if that means anything. I've never been able to decide. Week 5 was when the quality of the fear changed. I came home one Wednesday and noticed a mark on my front door that had not been there before. Low down, near the bottom, a thin horizontal scratch in the paint, the kind of mark you'd make dragging something metal slowly across the surface. I told myself it was old, that I simply never noticed it. I was not convinced. That same night, I woke again at 2. The light strip was unbroken, and I started to relax. Then one shadow appeared. Not 2, just 1 foot, toe pointed inward. as if someone was leaning their weight softly against my door. I lay completely frozen, thinking about how thin that door was, how the lock was one of those old single-bolt locks that the building had never upgraded. The shadow eventually disappeared. I turned every light on and did not sleep again. I spent the rest of that week sleeping in short bursts with all of the lights on. By the end of it, the exhaustion had gotten bad enough that one night I simply crashed, deeply, completely. The kind of sleep that swallows you whole. I don't know what time it was when I surfaced. The room was still dark. I came up slowly, groggy and disoriented, that thick confusion where you're conscious but your mind hasn't caught up yet. I lay there staring at the ceiling. Then my hand moved against something on the mattress beside me. I looked down without fully understanding what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to make it into something normal, an extension cord, a drawstring, a belt. But I reached out and touched it, and my fingers knew before my mind did. Thick, coarse, heavy in the way that soft things are not. A rope, coiled loosely on the mattress right beside where I had been sleeping, close enough that my arm had been resting against it. I sat up so fast the room tilted. I scrambled back against the headboard and stared at it. I hadn't put it there. I didn't own rope. I had never owned rope. I sat there trying to find any explanation for how it had gotten there onto my mattress while I was sleeping. There was none. The rope was just there. That's when I raised my head toward the door. The hallway light was on, that thin strip of yellow at the bottom, but the door itself was open, not wide, maybe 4 or 5 inches. The way you'd hold a door if you're trying not to make a sound. And in the gap, at eye level, there was a face, a man, turned sideways, one eye visible in the crack, the way someone looks when they're checking whether something's safe to do next. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking past me, scanning the room slowly, like he was making sure I was still asleep. I screamed. I didn't decide to. It came out of me instantly. The door snapped shut. I heard footsteps, fast and hard down the hallway, and then the stairwell door crashing open and shut behind him. I called 911 and did not move from the center of my bed until I heard the officers knock. The police found no one. They checked the building, the stairwells, the streets. Nothing. They photographed the rope and took it, which somehow made everything worse, because once it was gone, the room looked completely normal, like none of it had happened. They asked if anyone else had the key to my unit. I said only the landlord as far as I knew. Those last 4 words sat in my stomach like a stone. I left that night and never slept there again. The police never identified anyone. The rope was common hardware store cordage, untraceable, sold in dozens of places across the city. I've tried to work through it logically. Maybe the door had been improperly latched and drifted open. Maybe the rope was something maintenance left and somehow never noticed. Maybe the man was a neighbor who panicked when I screamed. None of it holds together under any real pressure. What I keep coming back to is the angle of his face in that gap. He wasn't looking at me. He was surveying. The way you look at a room when you're deciding whether it's the right moment to step inside. That look had intention in it. Clear, quiet, deliberate intention. I just don't know what he intended. And I'm aware every single day that the only reason I don't know is because I woke up when I did. I've been doing home health aid work for going on 11 years. Most of what you see, you learn to set down eventually. But there are certain nights that just become part of you. And not in a good way. What I'm about to tell you happened about 4 years ago, and I still think about it more than I probably should. I picked up an overnight through a staffing agency. The client was an 81-year-old man named Alfred. His son Greg had called looking for someone experienced with late-stage cognitive decline, Lewy body dementia specifically. Greg was polite, professional. He explained that he lived 40 minutes away, worked early mornings, and needed someone to cover his father from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Just one night to start, he said. See how it goes. I showed up around 9:30. It was a split level on a quiet road where the houses sat far apart and the trees had grown in close. Greg walked me through quickly. Kitchen, bathroom, the hospital bed set up in what used to be the dining room. Alfred was already in bed. Greg introduced us. Alfred looked at me with clear eyes, said pleasure to meet you, and seemed completely fine, sharp even. Greg kissed his father on the forehead and left. That was my first night in that house, and my last. The first few hours were uneventful. I sat in the kitchen with a book. I wasn't really reading. Alfred slept. I checked on him every half hour. Each time, he was on his back, breathing slow and even, hands folded on his chest like a man who had long since made peace with sleep. Around midnight, he was facing the wall. Same quiet breathing, just no longer facing the ceiling. I didn't make anything of it. A little after 2, I heard his voice from the other room. He was awake, staring upward. I asked if he needed anything. He said very quietly, "She keeps coming to the foot of the bed." I asked who he had meant. He turned in an perfect normal tone, said he needed some water. I brought it. He thanked me, closed his eyes, and he went to sleep inside 2 minutes. I want to be clear that up to this point, I wasn't scared. People with Lewy body dementia have vivid hallucinations. Visual ones, often of people or animals. Whatever Alfred saw at the foot of his bed was a product of his neurology. I knew that. I reminded myself of that. What I couldn't easily explain was what happened around 4 in the morning. I walked through the dark living room to stretch my legs and stopped at the hallway. At the end of it, maybe 30 feet away, Alfred was standing in front of a closed storage room door, socks, thin cotton pants, and one hand raised resting flat against it. I called his name softly. He didn't move. I walked toward him and he called again. He turned, perfectly calm, he said. "I was just checking." I asked what he was checking on. He looked at the door, then back at me. "She doesn't like it when I open it." I walked him back to bed. He went without resistance, pulled the blanket up himself, closed his eyes. I stood outside that storage room for a long time afterward. The door had a push-button lock on the knob, the kind you could lock from the inside. It was locked. I had told myself Greg had probably locked it before he left. I went back to the kitchen, kept the light on, and held my book without reading it. At 5:15, I heard the storage room door open. The small mechanical click of the push button releasing, the soft groan of the hinges, and then a silence that felt louder than any sound before it. I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway. The door was open about 4 inches, dark behind it. Alfred was in bed. I could see him from where I stood, asleep, on his back, hands folded on his chest. I turned back toward the kitchen. That's when Alfred was standing directly behind me. Not in his bed, behind me. Close enough that I nearly walked into him. He was holding a claw hammer at his side, worn wooden handle, knuckles white around the grip. His eyes were wide open and fixed on me. But there was nothing behind them I recognized as the man I'd met that evening. Not confusion, not the vague wandering expression I'd come to expect. Just flat, purposeful attention. He swung before I could say his name. I got my forearm up, and the hammer glanced off and hit the wall. I moved back and sideways, putting the hallway between us. He came toward me again with the same measured, unhurried walk. No raving, no shouting. Completely silent. That was the part that stayed with me. I got around him, through the living room, grabbed my bag from the kitchen chair without stopping, and went out the front door. I called Greg from the driveway, hands shaking. He didn't believe me at first. Then something in my voice made him stop talking. He said he'd be there in 40 minutes. I stood in the cold and watched the windows until his headlights came up in the road. He found Alfred in the hospital bed, asleep, hands folded on his chest. The hammer was on the kitchen table. Greg called later to apologize. Said his father had never been violent before, didn't know where the hammer had come from. I told him I didn't blame Alfred, and that I hope he found the right help for him. I never went back. Here's where I've landed 4 years later. The easy explanation is dementia, sudden aggression, a man moving through his home on muscle memory. I don't dismiss it, but I can't fully put down the other possibility. Alfred, when I met him, had been sharp, present. The confusion came and went away that felt almost managed. In the storage room door, I was meant to look at it. My attention was pulled down the hallway while Alfred was already behind me. Whether his illness works in ways that made that accidental, or whether some deliberate part of him had arranged it, I genuinely cannot say. What I can say is that the attack was not frantic. It was silent, and it was aimed. A man who wanted to appear lost had, and in the moment, known exactly what he was doing. I hope Greg finds the right kind of help for his father. Whatever is happening inside Alfred, illness or something else, wearing illness like a coat, he needs more than an overnight aid can give him, and that aid will not be me. I've been doing electrical work for going on 11 years now. In that time, I've been inside maybe 2,000 or 3,000 homes. You develop a feel for things, not in a mystical sense, just pattern recognition. You walk into enough spaces, you start reading them the way you read weather. Something in the air pressure shifts and your body knows it before your brain catches up. This particular job was in the fall of my 3rd year. I was working for a mid-sized residential contractor at the time. 6 guys, 1 dispatcher, and a rotating list of service calls that came through the main office line. The schedule had been messy that week. Our dispatcher was out sick. Calls were getting shuffled around, and more than once, someone showed up at a job that wasn't theirs. My supervisor, a quiet guy named Terrence, assigned me to a property about 40 minutes outside of the city. A homeowner had called in about flickering lights throughout the house. Standard stuff. Loose neutral probably. The kind of thing you clear up in under an hour if nothing else is hiding behind the walls. The drive out was long and forgettable. Rural roads, mostly. The address took me down a 2-lane highway that narrowed into a gravel road before terminating into a long unpaved driveway. The house at the end of it was old but not dramatically so. A 2-story colonial. White siding gone gray, black shutters. It looked like someone had been maintaining it just enough to keep it from looking abandoned. Emphasis on just enough. The lawn was cut, but the edges were ragged. A car sat in the driveway with a film of pollen across the hood. The kind of film that builds up over a week, maybe 2. Didn't look like anyone had driven it recently. Didn't match someone actively living there. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked up. A woman answered the door almost immediately, as though she'd been standing behind it. She was in her mid-50s, plain looking, wearing a cardigan despite the warmth of the afternoon. She smiled when she saw me. There was something slightly delayed about it, maybe a half-second lag between seeing me and producing the expression. I told myself I was reading into it. I told her who I was and why I was there. She said, yes, come in, then stepped aside. The inside of the house smelled of synthetic pine, something faintly organic underneath the cleaner, like fruit that had turned. I followed her through the foyer toward the kitchen, where she said the lights had been flickering worst. I noticed the furniture, the framed photos on the wall, the bowl of wooden decorative apples on the counter. All of it normal, all of it staged in a way that felt normal. She left me to work, and I opened the panel under the stairs first, checking the breakers. Everything looked fine at a glance, no obvious burns, no trip breakers. I started tracing the circuit for the kitchen lighting. I was crouched near the panel when the overhead lighting fixture dimmed for a second, then came back. Not a flicker exactly, more like the house exhaled. I noted it and kept moving. About 20 minutes in, I realized I hadn't heard her at all. No movement, no sound from another room, no television. Just that particular silence that large, still spaces get. I assumed she stepped outside. Then I heard her voice from somewhere above me. Low even. Not a phone call. Phone calls have a rhythm. Gaps and starts. This was nearly continuous. The same cadence, repeating, pausing, repeating again. One word surfaced briefly, almost recognizable, then dissolved before I could place it. I noted it and moved on. I've seen weird houses before. Didn't want to look paranoid over nothing. I pulled the switch plate off the kitchen fixture and found a junction I wanted a second look at. Wire nuts that had been redone recently, the wrapping still clean and white against the older wiring. Someone had been in here. Not necessarily a red flag. Previous owner could have done it. Any number of explanations. But I couldn't find a permit record when I pulled up the address on my phone. The work wasn't documented. I was about to climb down from the step stool when the footsteps overhead stopped abruptly. Then the house went very quiet. I stepped down and turned to get a different tool from my bag, but she was standing in the kitchen doorway. I hadn't heard her come from downstairs. I hadn't heard anything at all. My hand stayed on the bag longer than it needed to. I took an instinctive half-step back before I caught myself. I said something like, "Didn't hear you come down." She said, "I've always been light on my feet." Same delayed smile. I went back to work. I had maybe 10 minutes left. I was under the counter checking the ground wire when I heard the front door open and close. I assumed a family member. Then I heard a second set of footsteps in the foyer, heavier, deliberate. Too heavy to be hers, and didn't match the way she moved. Then a third set, then quiet. I came out from under the counter. She was standing against the far wall of the kitchen with her hands folded in front of her, watching me. Not the way someone watches a repairman, the way someone watches something they've been waiting on. I asked if she had family in the house. She said, "It's fine." Not yes, not no. It's fine. I packed my bag. I told her I identified the issue, that I'd call in the estimate from the van and have someone from the office follow up. She didn't argue or ask any questions. In 11 years of service work, homeowners always ask questions. She just nodded and walked me to the door. When I got back to the van, I sat for a moment. The upper windows were dark, then one of them wasn't. A figure standing back from the glass, mostly shadow. Then a second shape, slightly on the left. I thought it might have been a reflection. Then it moved. I drove. I didn't call it in right away. At the time, none of it felt like something I could explain over a phone. I ran through it in my head, and it all flattened out. Voices upstairs, footsteps, a woman who stood too still. Nothing you could hand to a dispatcher and have it land right. It all sounded like nothing when I tried to say it out loud. So I waited until I was back at the office and reported it to Terrence in person. Told him to flag the address. I don't know what he did with that information immediately. What I know is that I kept thinking about it for days after, and eventually, I pushed until something moved. The wiring I found under that switch plate had been deliberately disconnected and reconnected. Clean work, done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and exactly what kind of call it would generate. When I finally pressed Terrence about who had originally been scheduled for that job, he didn't have a clear answer. The shuffled schedule, the rerouted calls, no clean record of who was supposed to go out there instead of me. I think that's why she looked at me the way she did when I came from under that counter. Not caught, just recalibrating, like I wasn't who she'd been expecting. Police went out within the week. The house was empty. Nothing came of it officially. I still think about whoever was supposed to get the call instead of me. I work in a medical records administration at a mid-sized hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's not glamorous work. Mostly I sit in a basement-level office processing patient files, cross-referencing discharge paperwork, flagging inconsistencies for the clinical team upstairs. The kind of job that exists in the building full of people but somehow feels completely solitary. My department is just me and two colleagues, Priya and Dennis, and a supervisor named Greer who works remotely on Fridays. This was a Thursday in the deep part of autumn. About 2 years ago, Priya had taken the day off and Dennis left at his usual 5:15. I stayed behind because we had the quarterly audit submission due the next morning, and I was the one who had volunteered to finish it. That was my mistake in the grand scheme of things. Not because of the audit, but because staying late meant I was the only person on that floor. The basement level of the hospital isn't connected to the main wards. It's a separate administrative wing, records, billing, HR, a few storage rooms. The corridor is long and fluorescent lit, and the lights are on motion sensors after 7 p.m. to save energy. So as you walk, the section behind you slowly dims back to nothing. I always hated that, even before this happened. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was around 7:30. I'd been deep in the audit for a couple hours. Headphones on, coffee going cold beside me. I took the headphones off to stretch, and there it was. This faint medicinal smell. Sharp, almost sweet. Like antiseptic, but not quite. It's a hospital, so smells aren't unusual. But our wing didn't smell like the clinical floors. It smelled like old paper and recycled air. This was different, and it was coming from inside the office. I figured it was the cleaning staff. They come through the basement on Thursdays. I didn't hear the carts though. Usually you could hear them from halfway down the hall. That rattling metal sound that echoed in the corridor. There was nothing. Just the smell. I told myself they were probably working lighter that night. I put my headphones back on. About 40 minutes later, I got up to use the bathroom at the end of the corridor. When I came back, my desk chair was facing the wrong way. I know how it sounds, I know. It was facing the door instead of the monitor. I'm a creature of habit. I always try to push my chair back and square to the desk when I stand up. It's an unconscious thing. Pri used to make fun of me for it, but I specifically remembered pushing it in before I walked out. The chair wasn't pushed back. It was turned 90 degrees like someone had sat in it and swiveled around to face the entrance. The seat felt faintly warm when I put my hand on it, and it wasn't square to anything. It was angled slightly, the way it would be if someone had stood up in a hurry. I stood in the doorway for a second, running back through the last hour in my head. I couldn't dismiss it confidently enough to let it go, which bothered me more than the chair itself. But I didn't want to overreact over what could still be nothing. I straightened it, sat down, and kept working, building settle. People misremember. I had an audit to finish. At 9:47, I remember checking the time specifically. I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, even footsteps. Not the rubber-soled squeak of the cleaning staff. Something softer, more deliberate. They passed my door and kept going toward the storage end of the hall. I took my headphones off and listened. Those sensors had never failed in the 3 years I'd worked that shift. Not once. Even when they glitched, they'd flicker, that half-second shudder before catching. But I heard nothing. No click from the panels, no flicker. Just dead silence where the lights should have been. I opened my office door and looked out. The corridor was dark from about halfway down. The lights that should have responded to whoever just walked past hadn't come on at all. The hall was empty in both directions. I told myself it was the sensors. Told myself it was the sound carrying strangely through the ventilation from the floor above. Old hospitals make noise. I went back to my desk, but I didn't put the headphones on again. I finished the audit just after 10:30. I saved everything, backed it up on the shared drive, sent a confirmation email to Greer. I was running on adrenaline by then. That specific kind you get when you've been in a quiet building alone for too long. Hyper-aware, startling at nothing, embarrassed at yourself for being startled. I packed my bag and pulled on my coat. Before I turned off the desk lamp, I walked across the hall to the records room to drop off a physical folder I've been working from. The records room is lined floor to ceiling with filing shelves, 2 rows deep, with a narrow walking aisle between them. I went to the correct shelf, slotted the folder in. I was turning to leave when I noticed that a few folders on the lower shelf near the far end were out of place. Not scattered, not messy, just handled, pulled slightly forward, like someone had been leafing through them carefully and almost put them back. And then I noticed the shelf itself. One of the units at the far end was pulled out from the wall maybe 6 inches, the way you'd move it if you were accessing the secondary row behind it. Those shelves are heavy. They don't move on their own. You have to grip the handle and pull deliberately. I stood there looking at it. The gap behind the shelf was dark. The room was quiet. and I became aware that the quality of the silence had changed. It had a weight to it that hadn't when I walked in. I should have left. I know that now. But something made me take one step toward it. Just one. And then the light from the overhead panel caught the gap at the right angle. There were eyes looking back at me. Not glowing, but catching the light wrong, reflecting more than they should have. The way a lens does, or glass. Still and human, and set deep in a face I couldn't make out. A body that wasn't moving, standing pressed into the darkness behind the shelf, like it had been there for a long time. We looked at each other for what I can only describe as a moment that had no business lasting as long as it did. And then I ran. Behind me, as I hit the corridor, I heard it. One shelf slamming down, then another. Then a chain of metal shifting and collapsing like something was tearing through the room to get out. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was through the front doors. I drove home. I poured a glass of wine I didn't taste and called Dennis. He told me the cleaning crew had switched to Wednesdays 3 weeks ago. Nobody had told me. That medicinal smell, whatever it was, had nothing to do with them. Greer reviewed the corridor camera footage the next morning at my request. She called me around 11. The camera covered the full length of the hallways from 7 p.m. onward. No cleaning staff, no maintenance, no one entering or leaving the records room. Nothing. She also mentioned a gap. 9 minutes of footage between 9:40 and 9:41. Simply absent, not corrupted, not degraded, as if the camera had been paused by someone who knew exactly how long they needed. I think about the eyes most nights, the way they caught the light wrong. I think about the folders that had been handled so carefully, like someone was looking for something specific and didn't want to leave a mess. I think about what they were doing in the hours I sat 20 feet away with my headphones on, and whether they found it. I think about the chair turning toward the entrance, and how the seat was still warm. I don't know who it was, or how long they had been in that building, or whether they intended to do something to me specifically, or whether I was simply an inconvenience to work around. I only know that I was the last person to leave that night. The camera didn't show anyone else leaving, but it also missed 9 minutes, and I don't know who used them.
I got the job at Mel's Diner 3 weeks after I moved out of my parents' house. It was a 24-hour place off Route 9 with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2003. The pay was terrible, but they were willing to hire someone with literally zero experience. My first closing shift was on a Wednesday in late September. It started awful and got worse within a few hours. A trucker left a 5-cent tip on a $40 check. A woman threw her plate at me because I brought her scrambled eggs instead of hash browns, even though I had repeated her order back to her twice. And 2 guys in a corner booth kept making kissing sounds every time I walked past. By 11, I was counting down the minutes until midnight. My feet hurt. My apron was stained with ketchup and coffee, and I had already cried once in the walk-in freezer. That's when this guy walked in. He was maybe 32, dressed in a button-down shirt and clean jeans. He smiled when he sat down at the counter and asked how my night was going, and actually listened when I said it had been rough. He ordered a coffee and pie and left a $20 tip on an $8 check, and told me I seemed to be doing a good job despite everything. After the night I'd had, that kindness felt like oxygen. We talked while I wiped down tables. He said his name was Danny. He worked in sales and traveled a lot. He was passing through on his way to Albany. Danny was cheesy in places, but he was easy to talk to. Around 11:40, he asked if I wanted to grab a drink after my shift, said there was a bar still open a few miles down the road, and that I looked like I could use one after the night I'd had. I hesitated. My mom drilled it into me never to go anywhere with strange men, but Danny didn't feel like a stranger anymore. In fact, I was so comfortable around him that we might have been friends for a while, and I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment alone, sitting and replaying every awful moment of the shift. So I said yes. Danny smiled and said he'd wait outside. He told me he was driving a silver BMW that'd be parked near the road. The last customer left at 11:55. I helped the night cook Carlos finish closing, grabbed my jacket, and clocked out at 12:15. The parking lot was dark. The overhead lights had been busted for weeks, and nobody had bothered to fix them. I could see a silver car idling near the edge of the lot with its headlights off. I walked toward it. I was maybe 30 feet away when I felt somebody tug at my jacket from behind. I spun around to this shady-looking guy in a dark hoodie, grinning down at me. He was short but bulky. Most of his face was ducked under the hoodie, but I could see the yellow crooked teeth followed by a piercing on the upper lip. My heart started pounding. He leered at me as he stepped closer, gripping my arm so tightly his fingers dug into my flesh. He told me to be quiet, that we were just going for a ride. I looked toward the BMW. Danny was standing outside the driver's door now, watching. I screamed at him to come and help me. He didn't move. His face was flat, expressionless. My brain caught up. This was all planned. Danny was being nice to me, so I'd trust him and follow him outside alone. I screamed and dropped straight down, letting my weight go completely dead. The man wasn't expecting it. He stumbled forward and lost his grip on my arm for just a second. Without giving him time to recover, I stomped down hard on his foot with my heel and dashed straight for the diner. I pounded and screamed at the glass door with both fists until Carlos looked up from where he was mopping and rushed to unlock it. I shoved past him and told him to lock it again and to call the police. Through the window, I could see the BMW. Both men had already gotten in. The car backed up slowly, turned toward the exit, and drove away. Carlos called 911. I sat on the floor behind the counter with my knees pulled up to my chest, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later. They took my statement, checked the parking lot, and found nothing. One of them said the cameras outside hadn't worked in over a year. They asked what the man looked like. I realized I couldn't remember much except for an easy smile, brown hair, and an average-looking face. Danny looked so normal it was almost forgettable. Maybe that was the whole point. The officer said to keep an eye out, but without plates or a clear description, there wasn't much they could do. He asked if the man had said where he was from or where he was going. I remember him saying Albany, but then I wondered if anything he'd said was true. I quit the next day without even going back for my last paycheck. Carlos dropped it off at my apartment the following week. My mom wanted me to move back home. I told her I was fine, that it was just bad luck that I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I couldn't sleep in my apartment anymore. Every sound in the hallway makes me freeze. I got a new job a month later at a coffee shop that closed at 6. I only work day shifts now. I never walk to my car alone, even in broad daylight, and I don't talk to customers beyond what's necessary. I try to be super cautious now, but it doesn't stop me from thinking about that one time when I wasn't. My 16-year-old daughter, Anya, was on her way home from volleyball practice that Wednesday evening when a drunk driver ran a red light on her. The bystanders called the ER, but it was too late. She left a void in my heart and home that I couldn't fill no matter what. I had already lost my husband to cancer 4 years back, and there was nothing left for me in the city anymore. So I moved into the farmhouse 3 months after the funeral. It had been my aunt's before she passed and was left to me in her will. It sat on 12 acres with no neighbors for 2 miles. I set up Anya's things in the upstairs bedroom, still in boxes. I told myself I'd unpack her belongings eventually and turn her bedroom into a proper memorial, but I simply couldn't go in there without breaking down. My dog Cooper slept in my room most nights. He was a lab mix. Anya picked him out from the shelter when she was 10. About 6 weeks after I moved in, I noticed something odd. I was coming back from the grocery store around dusk when I looked up at the house and felt the curtain in Anya's window move slightly, as if someone had been standing there and ducked after seeing me. I stood in the driveway staring at it, telling myself it was the wind. Maybe I left a window open. But when I went inside and checked, All the windows were locked. That night, Cooper kept pacing the hallway outside my bedroom, stopping in front of Anya's closed door and growling low in his throat. I got up, put my ear against the door, and listened, but everything was exactly how it should be. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Over the next 2 weeks, small things kept happening. I'd turn off the kitchen light before bed and find it on again in the morning. The television would be on a different channel than I left it. Once I found the back door unlocked, even though I was certain I'd bolted it. I called the sheriff. They came and searched the property, but didn't find anything. The officer said old houses settle, locks can be tricky, and I should consider getting an alarm system if I were worried. 3 nights later, I woke up to footsteps upstairs, moving from one side of Anya's room to the other. The floorboards creaked in a rhythm I recognized. Anya used to pace when she was stressed about a test or upset about something at school. I grabbed my phone and crept into the hallway. Cooper was already there, pressed against the wall, trembling. As I climbed the stairs slowly, the footsteps stopped, still with my heart hammering. I reached Anya's door and opened it. Inside, the room was destroyed. Anya's boxes had been opened, and clothes were scattered everywhere. Dresser drawers were pulled out with contents dumped on the floor. The volleyball was gone from the windowsill too, and crouched beside the bed, wearing one of Anya's dresses, was a child-sized figure. For a second, my heart stopped beating. I was frozen as the figure slowly looked up, darted forward, and ran right past me. So close I felt the air move. I stood there shaking for I don't know how long before I could make my legs work. I went downstairs, turned on every light, called the sheriff, and sat in the kitchen with a knife until the cops arrived. They searched the whole house top to bottom, but couldn't find anything out of place. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. On the 4th night, I woke up to Cooper barking. I got up and found him in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, staring upward toward Anya's room. The same small figure wearing Anya's volleyball uniform was standing in the doorway. The shorts were too big, bunched up, and held with a belt. The jersey hung past the knees. I found my voice and asked who she was, asked why she was wearing Anya's clothes. The figure took a step forward into the light from the hallway. My stomach turned. It wasn't a child. The body was small, maybe 4.5 feet tall, but the face was wrong. It was deeply lined and weathered, basically an adult face on a child-sized body. Her eyes were sunken and dark, and her mouth stretched into a thin line. She giggled, saying she wore them because the clothes fit her just fine. She said she'd been waiting for someone to bring her new things. I screamed. Cooper bolted for the front door, and I followed without stopping to grab my phone or keys or anything. I ran barefoot down the driveway in my pajamas. I made it to my car and locked the doors, sitting there shaking and watching the house. The police came again. This time, they brought machines and dogs, and found a crawlspace access panel in Anya's closet that no one had ever noticed before. Behind it was a 3-foot-high space, running the length of the upstairs. Inside, they found blankets, food wrappers, and empty water bottles. Anya's volleyball was there too, along with a collection of her clothes neatly folded in the corner. The woman had been living up there for weeks, maybe longer than that. They searched the woods for hours, checked abandoned buildings, and talked to neighbors miles away. But nobody had ever seen her. I moved out that same day, stayed in a motel while my brother helped me pack everything. I sold the farmhouse within a year for half of what it was worth. Anya's things are in storage now. I can't bring myself to go through them without thinking about that woman wearing her clothes, sleeping in that crawl space right above where I thought I was keeping Anya's memory safe. Last week, I got a call from the new owners of the farmhouse. They wanted to know if I left any of my daughter's things behind. I told them I'd taken everything. They said they'd found a volleyball in the woods behind the house. asked if I wanted it back. I was 31 and working nights at a truck stop diner off Interstate 84. It wasn't a career, but I needed the job to survive. Jaden's dad had left when he was 2, and the child support check stopped coming 6 months later. The diner paid enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. It was a Tuesday in March, and I'd only had 3 tables all evening when 2 drunk oddballs stumbled in around 9. They looked to be in their 40s, had their work boots on, paired with flannel shirts. They were loud from the moment they sat down, but it wasn't the first time we were dealing with nuts. I brought them menus and water. One of them asked if I came with the meal. The other thought it was hilarious. I kept my face neutral and asked what they wanted to drink. The first one leaned back in the booth and looked me up and down slowly. He said he'd take whatever I was offering. I told them I'd give them a minute to look at the menu. Over the next 20 minutes, it got worse. Every time I walked past, one of them made nasty comments. They asked if I was single, made remarks about my body, and even blocked my path when I tried to leave their table. I kept smiling, stayed polite, and reminded myself how much I needed the job and tips for Jaden, until one of them grabbed my wrist. I was reaching across to refill the water when his hand shot out and wrapped around my arm. He pulled me closer and said I should sit down and have a drink with them. He started blabbering about things he'd do to me. I tried to yank my hand back, but he wouldn't let go. The other guy kept laughing. Tears welled up in my eyes. I was pissed and desperate. Without thinking twice, I raised my hand and slapped him hard. The sound echoed through the whole diner, and both of them went quiet. The one I'd slapped stared at me with his mouth half open as his cheek turned red. My manager, Frank, came yelling out of the kitchen. He'd seen the whole thing through the service window and threatened to call the cops if they didn't leave immediately. They walked out slowly, still looking at me. The one I'd slapped said I'd regret that. His friend laughed and said something I couldn't quite hear. Frank walked them to the door and watched them get into a pickup truck. He came back and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, that I just wanted to finish my shift. The rest of the night passed without incident. We closed at 11. I clocked out, grabbed my purse, and walked to the parking lot to find all 4 tires on my Honda were slashed. Unfortunately, Frank had already left, so the diner was locked, and my phone showed only 8% battery. I called a tow truck. They said they can't make it for 2 hours. I asked for a cab. The dispatcher said they could send one, but it would take at least 40 minutes. I couldn't wait in the parking lot that long with only 8% battery and no lights in sight except the one flickering pole lamp by the dumpster. So I started walking towards the gas station a quarter mile down the access road. I made it maybe 300 yards when headlights slowed behind me as a pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder. And then the 2 oddballs from earlier got out. Without wasting a second, I bolted. I cut across the drainage ditch, right into the woods behind the truck stop. Branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me. One of them was yelling my name. The other one was laughing. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, a root or a rock, and I went down hard. My knee slammed into the ground and pain shot up my leg. I tried to stand and couldn't. My ankle rolled under me, and I fell again. When I put weight on my left leg, it buckled. Something was broken or badly sprained. I crawled forward on my hands and knees and pulled myself deeper into the woods. My phone had fallen somewhere behind me. I could see the glow of the flashlight they were using, sweeping back and forth between the trees. Luckily, I found a fallen log and wedged myself behind it. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep quiet. My breath was coming in short gasps I couldn't control. The flashlight beam passed over the log and kept moving. They were maybe 20 feet away. I could hear them talking to each other, arguing about which direction I'd gone. One of them said I couldn't have gotten far. I stayed completely still. My leg was throbbing. I could feel something warm running down my shin, probably blood from where I'd hit the ground. They searched for what felt like hours. Their voices got farther away before they'd be closer again. At one point, one of them stood so close to the log I could smell cigarette smoke. Eventually, their voices faded. I heard a truck door slam in the distance and the engine humming away. I still waited another 30 minutes before I pulled myself upright using the log and started limping back toward the road. I found my phone in the dirt. The screen was cracked, but it was still working. It still had 2% battery. I called 911 and whispered my location. The dispatcher kept me on the line until the ambulance arrived. They found me sitting against a tree about 50 yards from the truck stop, covered in mud and blood. My leg was fractured in 2 places. They kept me in the hospital overnight for observation. The police took my statement the next morning. I gave them descriptions and told them about the truck. They said they'd look into it, but without plates, there wasn't much they could do. I quit the diner the day I got out of the hospital, told Frank over the phone. He said he understood and that he was sorry. One of my friends helped me get a remote job 3 weeks later at a call center. So I work from home now and avoid going after dark anymore. Jaden is only 5, but way more mature than kids his age. Maybe he couldn't get the whole story, but he knows his mommy survived something horrible. Over time, he may forget it, but I know I won't. I bought the house in May, right after I got the promotion at work. It was a small 2-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone minded their own business. The price was reasonable. The inspection came back clean, and I could finally afford to live alone. The neighbor to my right, Mr. Henry, seemed normal enough at first. I saw him once during the walkthrough. He was an older man in his 50s working in his garden. He waved and I waved back. I moved in on a Saturday and spent the weekend unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Sunday evening, I was carrying the last load in from my car when I noticed him standing at his upstairs window, looking down at me. I figured he was just curious about the new neighbor. But over the next week, I started noticing a pattern. Every time I came home from work, he'd be at that same window, standing still as a statue, peering down at me. I mentioned it to my coworker, Diane. She said old people get bored and that he probably didn't mean anything by it. I tried to believe that. 3 weeks in, I was taking a shower before bed. It was around 10:30, and I had the bathroom window cracked to let out the steam. The window was frosted glass, high enough that nobody could see in unless they were standing on something. I was rinsing shampoo out of my hair when I saw a bright flash of light through the frosted glass. I froze for a second before I turned off the water and wrapped a towel around myself. My hands were shaking. I killed the bathroom light and stood in the dark, trying to listen over the sound of my heartbeat. I could hear shuffling outside before hurried footsteps seemed to move away toward the fence line. I went to my bedroom window that faced his yard. In the dim light from his porch, I saw a shadow moving back toward his house. I didn't sleep that night, kept every light on and checked the locks on all the windows and doors at least a dozen times. The next morning, I called the police and told them what happened. They sent an officer out who took a report and said they talked to my neighbor. But without proof, it was difficult to do anything. He suggested I install curtains in all my windows and maybe get some motion sensor lights. I did both that same day, but it didn't stop. My dog Bailey started acting strange. She was a golden retriever and friendly with everyone, but she started barking at my bedroom window every night around midnight. She was pretty aggressive in a way I'd never seen before. One night, I looked out and saw fresh cigarette butts by my back fence. I don't smoke, nor do any of my friends who visited. The realization that someone could be lurking around my house made me paranoid. I started closing all my curtains before it got dark, stopped going outside after sunset, and toggled with my routine so I wasn't coming home at the same time every day. That Tuesday night, I'd gone to bed around 11. Bailey was on the floor beside me, already asleep. I was just starting to drift off when she bolted upright and started barking at the window. I sat up and listened. The house was quiet except for Bailey. I was about to tell her to settle down when I heard the sound of my bedroom window sliding open. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The window was open about 6 inches. As I watched, a hand reached through the gap and pushed it higher. Suddenly, his face flashed me a grin as he started pulling himself through. I screamed, grabbed the lamp from my nightstand, and swung it as hard as I could. It connected with the side of his head. Mr. Henry made a sound between a grunt and a gasp and fell backward. His body hung there for a second before he pulled himself free and dropped to the ground outside. I heard him running. Bailey was going insane, barking and throwing herself at the window. I called 911, told them my neighbor had tried to break into my house. They arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they went to his house, Mr. Henry answered the door like nothing had happened, claimed he'd been asleep the whole time. But I could see the blood on his temple where the lamp had hit him. The officers asked if they could search his house. He refused at first. Then his lawyer showed up and advised him to cooperate. They found 100 of my photos in his bedroom closet. Some of them were taken while I was showering or changing. He drilled a tiny hole in my fence and installed a small camera pointing at my back door. They found 2 more cameras in the bushes near my house. He was arrested that night. The trial took 8 months. His lawyer tried to argue he was just a lonely old man who developed an inappropriate fixation. The prosecutor showed the jury photos, the cameras, and the evidence of him tampering with my window lock. He got 4 years. I sold the house before he was even sentenced. Couldn't stay there another night. I live in an apartment now, on the 3rd floor, facing an open parking lot where I can see anyone approaching. I still check all my locks 3 times before bed and close every curtain the second the sun goes down. I lost Bailey last year to heart failure. Sometimes I look up his name online just to make sure he's not living near me. The registry shows an address 40 miles away, but I don't trust it. I think about those photos a lot. The ones they showed in court were just a fraction of what they found. The detective told me there were over 1,000 images. He'd been watching me from the moment I moved in, and I wonder how long he'd been planning to climb through that window. If that was the first time he tried, or just the first time someone had woken up. I was 17 when I started working at Crossroads Diner. It sat on Highway 81 in the middle of nowhere upstate. My shift was 5 to midnight on weekends, which meant I was usually alone up front while Hector worked in the kitchen. It was a Thursday in November when the man walked in around 9:30, right after the dinner rush had died down. He was thin, maybe mid-40s, and wore khakis and a plain blue sweater. His hair was neatly combed. He looked like a substitute teacher or an accountant at best. He settled in booth 7, the last one near the bathrooms, and ordered 2 bottles of water. I brought it to him with silverware wrapped in a paper napkin. He thanked me and pulled out a small notebook with graph paper inside. He started writing numbers in neat columns. By then, I'd encountered plenty of weirdos, so I simply went back to work but kept an eye on him. An hour passed, but instead of ordering food, he sat there, writing and occasionally sipping his water. Every few minutes, he'd glance up at me and would immediately look away the moment our eyes met. Around 10:30, I went over and asked if he wanted to order anything. He looked up with a small smile and said he was fine. He took a pause before he added my name. I froze. My name tag had fallen off 2 days ago, and I hadn't gotten a replacement yet, and didn't remember introducing myself. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he gestured toward the schedule board near the kitchen, said he noticed it earlier. That made sense. The board listed everyone's shifts with their first names. I relaxed a little and told him to let me know if he needed anything. He nodded and went back to his notebook. By 11:30, I started cleaning up for closing. The man was still there, scribbling stuff. I wiped down the other booths and refilled napkin dispensers, trying to work my way toward him without being obvious about it. He finally stood up around 11:45 and asked where the bathroom was. I pointed down the hall. He walked back there and I heard the door close. 10 minutes passed, but he didn't show up. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Hector was finishing in the kitchen, and I wanted to lock up and get out. I walked down the hallway and knocked on the bathroom door, calling out to ask if everything was okay, but the stalls might have been empty. I knocked harder, but again, got no answer. I tried the handle. The door opened, and the bathroom was really empty. I looked around and noticed the window above the toilet was unlatched, pushed open wide enough for a thin person to squeeze through. The screen was gone. I backed out of the bathroom, visibly shaken. My heartbeats picked up. I went to tell Hector, but he'd already left through the kitchen entrance. I was alone. I locked the front door, turned off most of the lights, and went back to the office to grab my jacket. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should lock the back door first. That's where they usually come in." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen and read it again as another text came through. "You took 4 minutes and 23 seconds to close last Tuesday. Tonight you were faster." I ran to the back door. It was still unlocked, exactly how Hector had left it when he went to his car. I slammed the deadbolt and backed away from it. My phone buzzed again. Good. I looked out the kitchen window toward the parking lot. Headlights flicked on across the highway, but maybe 200 yards away, a dark sedan was parked on the shoulder with the engine running. The man was standing beside it with his notebook in his hand. He was looking directly at the diner. He raised his hand slowly, held up 3 fingers, and pointed at me. I dropped below the window and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to explain what was happening. She said officers were on the way, that I should stay inside and keep the doors locked. I stayed on the floor behind the counter, watching the front door. Every few seconds, I'd peek up at the window. The headlights were still there. 2 patrol cars pulled in some 15 minutes later. I watched the officers get out and look around. One of them crossed the highway toward where the sedan had been parked, but it was gone. I don't know when he left. I'd stopped looking after the 5th minute, too afraid he'd somehow gotten closer. The officers came inside and took my statement. I showed them the text. One of them asked if I noticed anyone suspicious before tonight. I said no. He asked if I was sure and insisted that I really think about it. I did, and remembered how last week, maybe the week before, I'd seen someone sitting in booth 7 late at night. I couldn't remember their face, but I remember thinking it was weird they'd only ordered water. The officer asked if I had security footage. I told him the cameras hadn't worked in months, that the owner kept saying he'd fix them but never did. They stayed until my mom came to pick me up, told me to call if anything else happened. I quit the next day, told my mom I wanted to focus on school. She didn't argue. 2 weeks after that, I was at the grocery store with friends when I saw him in the cereal aisle, wearing the same blue sweater, holding a box of cornflakes. When he saw me looking, he smiled and gave me a little wave. I left my cart and walked straight out. My friends asked what was wrong. I told them I'd seen someone I used to know. That night I got another text. "You're faster at the grocery store too. 11 minutes from entrance to exit. Last time was 19. Efficient as ever, Noah." I was 12 when we moved into the house on Palm Street. My parents got it cheap at an auction, and we were excited about the deal until the realtor mentioned why the price was so low. The previous owner, Carlos, had been found dead in the attic where he'd apparently been hiding to escape his attackers. The police report claimed it to be a home invasion gone wrong, but they never caught the real culprits. My mom wanted to back out immediately, but Dad said a good deal was a good deal regardless. We moved in on a Sunday in August. I picked the bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was directly beneath the attic access and was the biggest room in the house, with windows on 2 walls and enough space for my desk and bookshelves. The attic entrance was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling just outside my door. The first week was normal. I set up my room, started at the new school, and tried to make friends. The house was old and creaky. But that didn't bother me until the footsteps started, moving back and forth above my ceiling. I'd hear them at night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was my parents up there, but when I asked them about it the next morning, they seemed pretty much clueless. My dad went up to check but found nothing except for some old insulation and boxes that the previous owner had left behind. He reassured me that it was probably just the house settling, or animals in the walls, but the footsteps didn't sound like settling. On the 4th night, I noticed a chemical smell like fireworks coming with the footsteps. It would drift down through the ceiling and fill my room until I had to open a window. I mentioned it to my parents again. My dad said old houses had weird smells, that it was probably just dust or mildew. He checked the attic again when he had time. 2 weeks in, I decided to handle it myself. I was tired of being scared and lying awake. I figured if it was an animal, I could scare it off. And if it were something else, at least I'd know. That night, I stayed awake with my door cracked open, waiting for the sound or smell. Right at 2:15 in the morning, the movement started. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder as quietly as I could. The smell nearly knocked me out. It was so strong I had to cover my nose with my shirt. I climbed the ladder slowly. My palms were sweating, and my heart was pounding. The attic was dark except the light from my phone. I could see exposed beams, pink insulation, and cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. The footsteps had stopped. Instead, a wet choking filled the space. It was coming from the far corner, past the boxes. I moved the light toward the sound, but could hardly see anything except dust floating and some shadows. Suddenly, I noticed legs lying on the floor in the corner, half hidden behind a support beam. As I crept closer, I could see a torso and an arm stretched out. My phone light shook in my hand. The man was on his back, wearing a white shirt that was dark and wet across the chest. His mouth was open. Blood was trickling from the corner, running down their neck and pooling on the wooden floor. Their eyes were open, and they were staring directly at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Just then, they blinked. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. The figure on the floor made that choking sound again. Their chests heaved like they were trying to breathe. I watched in horror as their fingers twitched against the wood. Their mouths stretched into a sick smile, and blood bubbled between their teeth. I screamed and ran for the ladder, fell down the last 3 rungs, and hit the hallway floor hard. My dad's bedroom door flew open, and he came running out asking what was wrong. I pointed up at the attic, trying to get words out. Told him there was someone up there and they were dying. My dad climbed up with his own flashlight. I heard him moving around up there, opening boxes and checking behind the beams. He came back down 5 minutes later, said the attic was empty. I insisted I'd seen someone, described exactly where they'd been lying, what they looked like. My dad said I'd had a nightmare, that I'd probably been sleepwalking, and told me to go back to bed. The next morning, I asked the kid next door about the house. He was a few years older than me and had lived on the street his whole life. He said Carlos had been running some kind of illegal operation out of the attic. When it went bad, he tried to hide up there. The people who came for him found him anyway. They shot him 7 times in the chest and left him there to bleed out. It took 3 days before anyone found the body. I asked if they ever caught who did it. He said the case went cold after a few months. That night, the footsteps started again. But this time, I didn't go up to check. I put headphones in and turned my music up loud enough to drown them out. I didn't go near the attic after that. I didn't even like walking past the ladder in the hallway, because sometimes, late at night, I could still smell the gunpowder seeping through the ceiling. And sometimes, I heard that wet choking sound mixed in with the footsteps. The moment I turned 18, I moved out of the house. I told my parents I wanted to be closer to college, even though I'm only going to community school 20 minutes away. My parents still live in that house, I think I'm being dramatic, but I know what I saw up there. And it isn't an animal or the house settling. It's Carlos, dying the same painful death every single night.